Economic Dialogue, IMF and Beyond, organized by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka. We've not had a very good period in the last 2 to 3 years. It was not just the pandemic, but it's also been an economic crisis, an unprecedented one at that. And now, while we are emerging from that quagmire, we would like to see Sri Lanka emerge to develop a clear roadmap for its economic recovery. The social and environment part will follow if the economic foundation is stable and solid. As a national body of accountants, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka recognizes the vital need for leadership and guidance in this critical moment. So today's forum is to facilitate a productive conversation among key stakeholders, including policymakers, business leaders, and economic experts, in an effort to promote a deeper understanding of the challenges facing Sri Lanka at this point and in the short, medium term, and long term, and the potential solutions to overcome them. So to begin today, I would like to invite to make the welcome address the President of CA Sri Lanka, Mr. Sanjay Bandara.
Honorable Ranil Wickramasinghe, President of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, Honorable Ranjit Siambalapitiya, State Minister of Finance, Honorable M.U.M. Ali Sabri, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Honorable Kanchana Wijesekara, Minister of Power and Energy, Mr. Sagala Ratnayaka, Senior Advisor to the President on National Security, Honorable Iran Virkamaratna, Member of Parliament representing SJB, Honorable Harsha De Silva, Member of Parliament representing SJB, Honorable M.A. Sumanthiran, Member of Parliament representing ITAK, Mr. Mahinda Siriwadana, Secretary to the Treasury, Dr. R.H.S. Samaratunga, Senior Economic Advisor to the President, Mr. Deshaldi Mel, Economic Advisor to the Ministry of Finance, members of the panel representing professional organizations, members of the Council, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to all of you. On behalf of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka, I am delighted to extend a warm welcome to all of you to the Forum of Economic Dialogue, IMF and Beyond. At the outset, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to Honorable Ranil Wickramasinghe, President of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, for accepting our invitation to attend this important forum to deliver the keynote address. Thank you, sir. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to the representatives of the government, opposition, professional bodies, chambers, business leaders, and all participants who will ensure that this economic discourse is insightful and thought-provoking. CA Sri Lanka has made a significant and long-lasting contribution to the country for more than 64 years. As a professional body, we have always taken the lead to play a critical role in not only disseminating thought leadership, but also in organizing forums like this to discuss and debate on national issues and matters pertinent to the business community. This economic discourse, therefore, is part of our proactive efforts to engage the government, opposition, professional community, and chambers in a constructive dialogue on a single platform. Recently, we requested for a meeting with Honorable Ranil Wickramasinghe to discuss pressing issues faced by the people including the professional community, in relation to taxation, reforms, corruption, and matters pertaining to reducing expenditure. We received a positive response to our request from the Presidential Secretariat. Therefore, as an independent body, and having understood the importance of such a discourse, we decided to hold an open forum by bringing together all parties, including the state, opposition, professional bodies, and chambers for a vibrant discussion. This is how today's economic forum came about. Our ultimate aim here is to facilitate an open discussion with all the stakeholders so that everyone has a better understanding of it. We hope that this constructive debate will help all of us to understand the roadmap for recovery and Sri Lanka's way forward. In conclusion, I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Dinesh Virakkodi, Chairman of the Board of Investment, Mr. Ruwan Wijewardena, Senior Advisor to the President, and Mr. Danushka Ramanayaka, Director of the President Media Unit, for their support in organizing this event. Thank you very much.
That sets the stage for today. Thank you very much, Mr. Bandara. May I now invite the State Minister of Finance, Honorable Ranjit Siyamalapitiya, for his address.
ආයුබෝවන් ගරු ජනාධිපතිතුමනි ගරු විදේශ අමාත්‍යතුමනි බලශක්ති අමාත්‍යතුමනි ජනාධිපති ජ්‍යෙෂ්ඨ උපදේශක සාගර රත්නායක මැතිතුමනි ගරු මන්ත්‍රීවරුනි මුදල් අමාත්‍යාංශ ලේකම්තුමනි මහ බැංකුව අධිපතිතුමනි විශේෂයෙන්ම වරලත් ගණකාධිකාරී ආයතනයේ සභාපතිතුමනි සුවිශේෂී ආරාධිත අමුත්තනි IMF සහ ඉන්න ඔබට ඔබට යන්නට ප්‍රථම වචන කිහිපයක් අපි අපිට වෙච්ච දේ කතා කළ යුතුයි කියලා මම කල්පනා කරනවා. ඇයි අපිට මෙහෙම වුණේ? අපි ද්විත්ව හිගයක් සමග කාලයක් ගමන් කළා. මේ හිගය වෙනස් කිරීමට සමහර යුගවලදී යම් දේ කළා. සමහර යුගවලදී ගැන සැලකුවේ නැහැ. අපිට රාජ්‍ය ආදායම ගැන හිගයක් ආදායම් සහ වියදම අතර වෙනස දිගින් දිගටම ආවා. මම දකින්න විදිහට ප්‍රාථමික ගිණුම ඔබතුමාලා දන්නවා රජයේ ආදායම සහ පොලි නොවන රාජ්‍ය වියදම අතර වෙනස කාලයක් දිග නැත්නම් වර්ධනාත්මක වෙනසක් මේ දෙක අතර ඇති කරනු ලැබුවා. ගෙවුම් ශේෂය පැත්තෙන් බැලුවත් ඒ වගේ. කාලයක් තිස්සේ අපිට ලැබුණු දේ සහ අපි විසින් වියදම් කළ දේ අතර ලොකු වෙනසක් දිගින් දිගටම වර්ධනය වුණා. ජංගම ගිණුම ඔබතුමාලා දන්නවා අපිට විදේශයෙන් ලැබෙන දේ සහ ගෙවන දේ අතර වෙනස ප්‍රාථමික ආදායම් ගිණුම අපේ පොලි ගෙවීම මෙවත් එක්ක අපි ණය අරගෙන මේක පියව ගත්තා. අපි මේ ණය අරගෙන සුවිශාල යටිතල පහසුකම් සංවර්ධනයකුත් කළා. ඒකේ වරදක් කියන්න බෑ. හැබැයි අපිට ඉපයීම ඩොලර් ඉපයීම විදේශ විනිමය ඉපයීම අපිට අවශ්‍ය වෙලාවට තිබුණේ නැහැ. කලක් ගතවන දීර්ඝ ඉපයීම් වෙනුවෙනුයි අපේ වියදම් කෙරුණේ. අපි නැවතත් ණය ගත්තා. නැවතත් ණය අරගෙන මේ පියවීම කරනු ලැබුවා. අපේ ණය තොගය සුවිශාල ගණනකට ආවා. දැන් අපි 128ක් දළදේශීය නිෂ්පාද්‍යත් එක්ක. අපිට නොසිතූ විරූ ප්‍රශ්න කීපයකට එක් යුගයකදී මුහුණ දෙන්න සිද්ධ වුණා. පාස්කු ප්‍රාහාරය ආවා. අපේ ඩොලර් උපයන විදේශීය උපයන ප්‍රධානම කර්මාන්තයට දැවැන්ත ප්‍රාහාරයක්. සංචාරකයන් පැමිණීම 2018 23 ලක්ෂයයි අවුරුදු දෙකක් යනකොට ලක්ෂ 2යි. ලොකු ප්‍රශ්නයක්. කොවිඩ් ආවා. අපිට දින 100 ගණනක් රට සම්පූර්ණයෙන් වහන්න සිද්ධ වුණා. ලෝක ආර්ථික ප්‍රශ්නත් ආවා. ඒ වගේම අපි බලාපොරොත්තු ඵලයන් නොලැබෙන ආර්ථිකමය තීන්දුව කීපයකුත් අපි ගනු ලැබුවා. ඵලයන් නෙවෙයි අපිට ඍණ ඵලයන් නැත්තම් අවපසට තමයි අපේ වර්ධනය සිද්ධ වුණේ. අපේ බදු සහනය අපි ළඟ තිබුණු 17 ලක්ෂයක් වූ බදු ලිපිගුණ සංඛ්‍යාව ලක්ෂ 5කින් පහතට ආවා. අපි අද මේ බොහෝ විට කතා බහ කරන උපයන විට ගෙවීම තමයි විශේෂයෙන්ම එතෙන්දී අපිට අවම තත්වයකට ආවේ. ඒ වගේම අපේ පොහොර ප්‍රතිපත්තිය අපේ රටේ ප්‍රධානතම නිෂ්පාදනය සමග සුවිශාල ගැටුමක් ඇති වුණා. මෙන්න මේ කාරණාත් සමග අපි 20 22කට යනකොට රාජ්‍ය ආදායම දළ දේශීය නිෂ්පාද්‍ය සාපේක්ෂව 8.2ක් ලෝකයේ අඩුම තැනකට අපිව ගොනු වුණා. ඊටමත් ප්‍රශ්නකාරී තත්ත්වයක්. දැන් මම කිව්වා අපි හැම විටකම අපේ ණය තොගය කළමනාකරණය කරගත්තේ තවත් ණයක් අරගෙන කියලා. බොහෝ යුගවලදී. සමහර යුගවල ඒකට එහා ගිය අභියෝගාත්මක කාරණාවලට ගියා. දැන් මේ වෙනකොට අපේ තත්ත්වය ලෝකේ ණය ශ්‍රේණිගත කිරීම ආයතන විසින් අපේ ණය හිමියන්ට ප්‍රකාශ කළා වරින් වර. දැන් ශ්‍රී ලංකාව සමග ගනුදෙනු කිරීම ගැන දෙසරයක් හිතන්න. මෙන්න අපිට ප්‍රශ්නයක් ආවා. අපි ළඟ රුපියලුත් නැහැ. රාජ්‍ය ආදායම දළ දේශීය නිෂ්පාදන සාපේක්ෂව 8.2යි. අපි 120ක් වියදම් කරනවා. 12ක වෙනසක් අපි හොයන්න ඕනේ. මේක හොයන්න නම් අපිට දැන් ණයට දෙන්න කෙනෙකුත් නැහැ. අපිට දැන් දේශීය වශයෙන්ුත් මුදල් නැහැ. විදේශීය වශයෙන්ුත් මුදල් නැහැ. අපි අපේ රටේ ලොකු භාණ්ඩ හිගයක් ඇති වුණා. ඔබතුමාලට මතක ඇති. අත්‍යවශ්‍ය දේ දිගු පෝලිං කිලෝමීටර් 5ක් 6ක් පෝලිං ලොකු ජන උද්ඝෝෂණයක් අපේ සංජිත ඍණාගයකට ආවා. මහා බැංකුවට කියන්න සිද්ධ වුණා අපි తాවකාලිකව ද්විපාර්ශ්වික ණය හිමියන්ට ගෙවන්නේ නැහැ කියලා. 2022 අප්‍රේල් මාසේ 12 වෙනිදා ඊට අපිට තව එක පඩියයි වැටෙන්න තිබුණේ ණය නොගෙවා ඉන්න. නමුත් ඒ දැනුම් දීම මහ බැංකුව කරා වගකීමෙන්. ඉන් පස්සේ මොකද්ද අපිට යන්න තිබුණු එකම තැන අපි හැමදෙනෙක්ම පිළිගත්තා. පක්ෂ විපක්ෂ දේශපාලන වශයෙන් බැලුවත් අපිට යන්න තිබුණේ IMF එක. ජාත්‍යන්තර මූල්‍ය ආයතනය. අපි ගියා. හැබැයි අපිට ලොකු අභියෝගයක් තිබුණා. අපි 16 වතාවක් වුන් සම කටයුතු කළා. ඒ 16 වතාවෙම අපි අවශ්‍ය වෙලාවට අපි එතනට ගියා. කලින් අපිට අභියෝගයක් එන බව දැකලා අපි ගියා. හැබැයි මේ වතාව අපිට යන්න උනේ බුන්වත් රටක් හැටියට. අපිට ලොකු ප්‍රශ්නයක් තිබුණා. ඕන් මූලික එකඟතාවය දුන්නා 2022 අගෝස්තු වෙනකොට. හැබැයි අපිට අපේ ද්විපාර්ශ්වික ණය හිමියන් සමග සාකච්ඡා කරලා ඔවුන්ගේ එකඟතාවය මේ ණය ප්‍රතිහෝගතකරණය කරන්න කැමැති කියන එක. ඒක ලොකු අභියෝගයක්. ජනාධිපතිතුමායකට ඉතාම සුවිශේෂ නායකත්වයක් දුන්නා. දැන් අපි අන්න එතනට ඇවිල්ලා තමයි පසුගියදා අද අපි ඔබ්බට කියලා කතා කරන්නේ IMF එකෙන් ඔබ්බට. අපේ රටේ සාමාන්‍ය ජනතාව ප්‍රතිඥා පත්තු කළා ප්‍රීති වෙන තැනකට ආවා. වුන් දැක්ක අපිට යන්න තිබුණ එකම තැන ඒ ජයග්‍රහණයක් හැටියට වුන් දැක්කා. දැන් අපි ඒකත් එක්ක සුවිශේෂී අභියෝග රාශියක් එක තමයි ඉස්සරහට යන්නේ. මොකද අපි මම කිව්වා 16 වතාවක් ජාත්‍යන්තර මූල්‍ය අරමුණු සම කටයුතු කරා. ඒ 16 වතාවෙම වැඩි වතාවන් ගණනක් අපි ඇති කරගත් එකඟතා ආරක්ෂා කරන්න අපිට බැරි වුණා. අපිට ජනප්‍රිය කරුණුත් එක්ක ගොනු වෙන්න සිද්ධ වුණා. අපේ විවිධ මැතිවරණයන් වෙනුවෙන් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. අපි වගකීම නොගැනීම වෙන්න පුළුවන්. හැබැයි දැන් අපිට ඊට වඩා වෙනස් අභියෝගයක් තියෙනවා. අපි ඉන්න තැනත් අපි දන්නවා. ජාත්‍යන්තර මුල් ආයතනයත් අපි මෙතෙක් ගත්ත ක්‍රියාමාර්ගات එක්ක වැඩි සොයා බැලීමක් කළ යුතුයි කියලා. ඒකේ වරදක් නැහැ. අපිට තියෙන අපි ඉටු කළ යුතු කාරණා හැටියට අපි සමගාමීව මේ තැනට එනකොට ක්‍රියාත්මක කරුණු කීපයක් තිබුණා. උද්දමනය පාලනය කළ යුතුයි කියලා. ඔබතුමාලා දන්නවා. අපේ ආහාර උද්දමනය 90% ඉක්මවා ගියා. පොඩි සාමාන්‍ය අඩු ආදායම් ලාභී ජනතාව ඉතාම අසිරු තැනකට ආවා. 70%ක උද්දමනයක් සාමාන්‍ය උද්දමනය ගියා. ඉතින් අපිට මේක පාලනය කරන්න අවශ්‍ය වුණා. එක්ක අපි බඩු සුලභ කරන්න ඕනේ රට ඇතුලේ. නැත්නම් අපි වැඩිපුර ආනයනය කරන්න ඕනේ. මේ දෙකම අපිට බෑ. එහෙනම් අපිට තිබිච්ච කෙටිම මාර්ගය ගත්තා. කෙටිම ඍජුම බැංකු පොලිය ඉහළ දැමීම. ඒක අසීරුයි. ජනකාධිකාරී වරුන් හැටියට ඔබතුමාලා දන්නවා. ඔබතුමාලා වියදම් සැලැස්මක හිටියා. ඒ වියදම් සැලැස්මේ ණය සඳහා වූ පොලිය එක්වරම දෙගුණකින් වැඩි වුණා. අසීරුයි. ඔබතුමාලාටත් අසීරුයි. සාමාන්‍ය ණය හිමියෙකුටත් අසීරුයි. හැබැයි මොකද්ද මහ බැංකුවට ගන්න තිබිච්ච වෙනත් පියවර? අපි දැක්කා මේ පියවරත් එක්ක උද්දමනය අද සෑහෙන පාලනයකට ලක් වුණා. මේ අසීරු පියවරත් එක්ක. අපි ඒක තවදුරටත් ත්‍යා යුතු වෙනවා යම් කාලයක්. රාජ්‍ය ආදායම වැඩි කරගත්තා. 8.2ක අපිට ඉන්න බෑ. වැඩි කරගැනීමේදී ප්‍රශ්න දෙකක් අපිට තිබුණා. එකක් අපි වක්‍රබදු වලින් තවදුරටත් යනවාද අපි ටිකක් වැඩි කරගත්තා. හැබැයි අපිට වගකීම ඍජු බදු වැඩි කර ගැනීම. උපයෝගීට බදු වලට ගියා. අපි අහිමි කරගත්තේ අපි නැවත හඳුන්වා දුන්නා. යම් ප්‍රතිශතයක් වැඩි කරා. අසීරුයි. හැබැයි වෙන මොකක්ද විකල්පය? මේ බදු ගැන කතා කරද්දී විශේෂයෙන්ම මෙතන ඉන්නේ වරලත් ගණකාධිකාරීවරු අති විශාල ප්‍රමාණයක්. මේ රටේ බුද්ධිමත් උගත් ඒ වගේම බොහෝ ආයතනවල මූල්‍ය උපදේශකවරු. බොහෝ ආයතන මෙහෙවන්නන්. ඒ නිසා මම මතක් කරන්න කැමතියි මේ සියලු දේ මැද්දේ අපෙන් ගිලිහි යන ආදායමකුත් විශාල වශයෙන් තියෙනවා. විවිධ හේතු. සමහර විට උපක්‍රමශීලීව අපෙන් ගිලිහා ගන්නවා. එහෙම නැත්නම් විවිධ හේතු නිසා ගිලිහෙනවා. ඔබතුමාලාට ලොකු වගකීමක් දැන් පැවරලා තියෙනවා. අපි මේ ජාතික ව්‍යායාමයක යෙදෙන්නේ. ඒ ව්‍යායාම සාර්ථක කර ගැනීමට. ඒ වගේම අපිට සිද්ධ වුණා රාජ්‍ය ආයතනවල වාණිජමය වශයෙන් කරන රාජ්‍ය ආයතනවල ලාභ නොලබන තැනකට මේව අරන් එන්න. අපිට සිද්ධ වුණා විශේෂයෙන්ම විදුලි බල මණ්ඩලය කන්ටෙල් සංස්ථා මේව මිල ගණන් වෙනස් කරන්න. විදුලි බල මණ්ඩලය මිල වෙනස් කරන්න ගියාම ප්‍රශ්නයක්. ඇයි? අපි විදුලි බල මණ්ඩලයේ මෙතෙක් දිගට ආවේ සමාජයේ මේ සුබ සාධන ආයතනයක් වාගේ. මම කාලයක් අමාත්‍යවරයා හැටියට හිටියා. ඒ වෙනකොට සාමාන්‍ය නිෂ්පාදන යොදම ඒකකයකට රුපියල් 16ක්. හැබැයි අපි වැඩි ප්‍රමාණයක් අලෙවි කරේ රුපියල් 4කට. ලොකු ප්‍රශ්නයක් එතන තියෙනවා. හැබැයි වැඩි කරන්න ගියාම ඇමතුමා මුණ දෙන ප්‍රශ්නේ තමයි අර විශාල මට්ටමේ පරිභෝජකයාගෙන් ඒ වෙනකොටත් නිෂ්පාදන යොදම අභිභාගයේ මිලක් අරන් තිබුණා. අර සුළු පරිභෝජකයාට තමයි මේක කරන්න වෙන්නේ. ජනප්‍රිය නෑ. හැබැයි ඒ තීන්දුව එතුමාට ගන්න සිද්ධ වුණා. මම කියන්නේ මේවා ක්‍රියාත්මක කිරීම ඇතිවන සමාජමය අභියෝග. මේවා කෙනෙක්ට හරි පහසුවෙන් අහන්න පුළුවන්. ඇයි ඉහළ තැනට වැඩි නොකර මෙතනින් වැඩි කරේ? කාරණාව අරකයි. ශක්තිමත් සමාජ දැලක් අපි හැමදාම කියනවා අපි නිදහස ලැබපු දා ඉඳන් සමාජ ආරක්ෂණය කරලත් අපිට තාමත් ඒකේ කෙලවර දකින්න බෑ. හැබැයි මේ සැරේ අපිට ලොකු වගකීමක් තියෙනවා. හරියාකාර අවශ්‍ය කෙනාට සමාජ ආරක්ෂණය ලබා දෙන්න. ලක්ෂ 37ක් පවුල් ඉල්ලලා තියෙනවා. අපිට සමාජ ආරක්ෂාව දෙන්න කියලා. දැන් අපිට වගකීමක් තියෙනවා මේ IMF එකඟතාවෙනුත් එක්ක. ඒ නැතත් මේක අපේ වගකීමක්. මේ මිනිසුන්ගෙන් හරියාකාර කවුද තෝරගන්නේ? දැන් තෝරගන්න ගියාම ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියෙනවා. මේ වගකීම ගන්න මොකද පනතේ හැටියට තොරතුරු දෙන්නත් මේ වගකීම ගන්න අවශ්‍යයි. තොරතුරු රැස් කර නිලධාරියත් ගන්න අවශ්‍යයි. නිලධාරිතුමා කියනවා මට ඒ වගකීම ගන්න බෑ කියලා. අපි මුණ දෙන අභියෝග. දැන් වෙනත් කණ්ඩායමක් දාලා අපිට තොරතුරු සකස් කරගන්න සිද්ධ වෙලා තියෙනවා. හැබැයි මේ අපි යන යහපත් ගමනේ යහපත් ඔබතුමාලා කවුරුත් පිළිගන්නවා ඇති. රජයේ ආධාරයක් දෙන්න ඕන නැත්නම් අවශ්‍ය කෙනාට. හැබැයි ඒක තෝරාගන්න ගියාම ප්‍රශ්නයක්. හැබැයි ඒ ප්‍රශ්නෙට මුහුණ දීලා අපි ඒක ක්‍රියාත්මක කරගෙන යනවා. දැන් ඉදිරියට අපි කාරණා රාශියක්. මහා බැංකුව ස්වාධීන කිරීම. ඔබතුමාලා කවුරුත් පිළිගන්නවා ඇති. අපි කළ යුතුයි. දැන් පනත පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට ගෙනත් තියෙනවා. මහා බැංකුව වඩාත් ස්වාධීන කිරීම. අපේ මුදල් ලේකම්තුමා ඉම්පස්සේකට වාඩි වෙන්නේ නැහැ. මුදල් මණ්ඩලයට අපිට අවශ්‍ය විදිහට මුදල් මුද්‍රණය කරන්න බෑ. මහා බැංකුව වඩාත් වැඩියෙන් පාර්ලිමේන්තුවත් එක්ක කතා බහ කළ යුතුයි. මේ ඔක්කොම හොඳ දේවල්. ශක්තිමත් දූෂණ මර්දන පනතක්. මෙන්න මේවත් එක්ක තමයි අපි ඉස්සරහට යන්න උත්සාහ කරන්නේ. අපි රටේ ජනතාවත් එක්ක කටයුතු කිරීමේදී බලපාන ප්‍රධානම දෙයක් රාජ්‍ය ආයතන ප්‍රතිහුගත කිරීම. කොටස් දෙකකට බෙදෙනවා. එකක් තමයි අලාභ ලබන ආයතන. ඒක නම් දැන් බොහෝ අය හිත හදාගෙන ඉන්නවා. අපි දිගින් දිගටම රුපියල් බිලියන් 400ක් විතර වාර්ෂික වියදම් කරලා ආයතන ගණනාවක් රැකගෙන ආවා. ඔබතුමාලා කවුරුත් එකතු කරලා දෙන බදු මුදලින් තමයි මේවා රැකුනේ. රුපියල් බිලියන් 300ක් 400ක්. අධ්‍යාපනයට වියදම් කරනවා රුපියල් බිලියන් 600ක් 700ක්. ඒකෙන් භාගයට වැඩි අපි වියදම් කරනවා රාජ්‍ය ආයතන රැකගන්න. අවශ්‍ය අධ්‍යක්ෂ මණ්ඩල දේශපාලන විශේෂපත් කරලා ඒ දුර්වලකම් සියල්ල බදු ගෙවන්නන් විසින් ගෙවන්න ඕනේ. මේක දැන් සමාජයට මේක පිළිගැනීමක් තියෙනවා. ඒක කළ යුතුයි. හැබැයි තවත් තැනක් තියෙනවා. රජය දැන් ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් වශයෙන් අපි ව්‍යාපාර වලින් ඉවත් වෙන්න ඕනේ. ඒක තමයි දැන් ඊළඟ ප්‍රතිපත්තිය. ඇත්ත. රජය කරන දේ නියාමනය කරමින් හොඳ බදු මුදලක් අරගෙන මේ සේවකයෝ ටිකත් ආරක්ෂා කරන වැඩපිළිවෙලක් විනිවිදභාවයෙන් යුතුව මේවා. හැබැයි අපේ සමාජයේ මේවා දිහා බලන ක්‍රමය ඔබතුමාලා සමාජ නායකයෝ නිසා මම මේ විශේෂයෙන් කියන්නේ ගණකාධිකාරිවරුන් කියන්නේ මූල්‍ය කළමනාකරුවන් කියන්නේ ආයතනයක් නෙවෙයි. සුවිශාල සමාජ වටපිටාවකට උපදෙස් දෙන අය. ඉතින් මේ අපේ ඇඟෙන් එන සමහර දේවල් තියෙනවා. දැන් මම කතා ඉවර කරන්න යන්නේ සාමාන්‍ය ජනතාව එක්ක මම නිතරම කතා බහ කරනවා. මට එක සහෝදරයෙක් පසුගියදා කියනවා එමෙතුමා අර මේ හොඳට තියෙන ඉස්පිරිතාලෙත් එකුණන්න නේද යන්නේ ලංකා රෝහල ගැන. මම අහුවා දැන් ඔබතුමා ඒක රජය කියලා දන්නවද? අද තමයි දන්නේ. එදා තමයි එතුමා දැනගෙන තියෙන්නේ. දැන් ඒකෙන් ඔබතුමාට විශේෂ ප්‍රයෝජනයක් ගත්තද? නැහැ මම ගිහිල්ලාම නැහැ. හැබැයි ඒක දෙන්න එපා. මම අහුවා දැන් ඔබ මේක හරියාකාරව කරලා මේ සේවකයොත් ආරක්ෂා කරලා ලැබෙන සේවයත් වැඩි කරලා අපි ඒකෙන් ලැබෙන ආදායම මේකෙන් ලැබෙන බදු මුදල ඔබතුමාලාගේ ජීවන තත්ත්වය නගා සිටන්න යෙදුවොත් එදිනදා වියදම අඩු කරගන්න ඒක හොඳයිලු. හැබැයි අපි ජානවල අපිට තියෙනවා මෙහෙම දෙයක්. අපේ ජනාධිපතිතුමා මේවා අපි කියනකොට සමහර විට එතුමාට hina යනවා. එතුමා අවුරුදු 20කට ඉස්සෙල්ලා මේවා කිව්වා අපිට. අපි එතන මේවට ඉතාලත් තදින් විරුද්ධ වෙනවා. මේ අපේ ගැළපෙනම සටන් පාර්ටිය බවට අපිපත් කරගත්තා. 2001 ඉඳලා 2004 වෙනි කාලේ 2004 කෙටි කාලයකින් අපි බලය ලබා ගන්න පාවිච්චි කරපු ප්‍රධානම සටන් පාර්ටිය. එතකොට hina වෙනවා ඇති. අපිට ඒක කියන්න සිද්ධ වෙලා තියෙනවා. කාලයකට පස්සේ බොහොම කාලයක් ගිහිල්ලා ප්‍රමාද වැඩි මං හිතන්නේ. අපිට සිද්ධ වෙලා තියෙනවා මේවා ගැන නැවත කතා කරන්න. ඒ නිසා අපි ඒ වගකීමත් අරගෙන ඉදිරියට යා යුතුයි. ඉතින් මම නැවතත් කියන්නේ ඔබතුමාලා විශේෂයෙන්ම ගණකාධිකාරිවරුන් කියන්නේ විශේෂයෙන් වරලත් ගණකාධිකාරිවරු අති දක්ෂ මූල්‍ය කළමනාකරුවන් පිරිසක්. අපි විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයන් කාලවල වරලත් ගණකාධිකරණ විභාගයෙන් චාර්ටඩ් ගොඩ දාගත්තා කියලා කියන්නේ කාලේ ඉතාමත් විශිෂ්ට දක්ෂව හැටියට අපි දකිනවා. අපිට බැරි වුණ දේවල්. අද දක්ෂයින්ට ලොකු වගකීමක් පැවරලා තියෙනවා. ජනාධිපතිතුමා මේක විස්තරාත්මකව කියාවි. අසීරු ගමනක් අපිට මේ රට හැබෑවට නගා සිටවන්න අපිට අවශ්‍ය නම් අසිරු ගමනක් අපි ධෛර්යයෙන් යුතුව යා යුතු වෙනවා. ඒකට අපි සියලු දෙනාගේ හැබෑ අවංක කැපවීම විපක්ෂ සහෝදරවරුත් මෙතන ඉන්නවා. ඒ බොහෝ දෙනෙක් මේක දිහා හොඳ ඇහින් බලනවා කියලා මම දකිනවා. ඒ නිසා අපි කැපවීම කළ යුතුයි. ඔබතුමාලා තමයි අපිට විශේෂයෙන්ම ආදායම හොයලා දෙන්නේ. ඒ ප්‍රධාන ආයතනවල. ප්‍රධාන ආයතන කිහිපයක් තමයි අපේ රටේ මේ මුළු බදු ආදායමෙන් 50%කට වැඩිය ලැබෙන්නේ ඔබතුමාලා කළමනාකරණය කරන ආයතනවලින්. ඒ නිසා මේ සියල්ල පිළිබඳ යහපත් ඇසකින් ධනාත්මක ඇසකින් මේ අවශ්‍ය ධෛර්යය අපි සියලු දෙනා ලබාගත් එක්ක ඉටු කළ යුතු සංග්‍රාමයක අපි ඉන්නේ. අන්නේ සඳහා විශේෂයෙන්ම අද මම හිතන්නේ මේ වෘත්තීමය කණ්ඩායමක් සමග කරන පළවෙනි සම්මන්ත්‍රණය මේ IMF එකඟතාවයෙන් පස්සේ මම හිතනවා ඉතාම අත්‍යවශ්‍ය වැදගත්ම වෘත්තීමය කණ්ඩායමක තමයි අපි සාකච්ඡාව කරන්නේ. ඒ සභාපතිතුමාට මම ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා. ඒ වගේම ප්‍රාර්ථනා කරනවා මේ සාකච්ඡාව ඉතාම සඵල සාකච්ඡාවක් වේවා. මේ අපි යන්න සූදානම්. ගරු ජනාධිපතිතුමා දැඩි අභියෝගයක් බාර අරගෙන යන ගමන සාර්ථක කරගන්න ඔබතුමාලා සියලු දෙනාටත් හොඳ කොටස්කරුවන් වෙන්න. මොකද අද මෙතන වාඩි වෙන තව මොහොතකින් මේ කණ්ඩායම ඔබතුමාට අවශ්‍ය බොහෝ ප්‍රශ්න අපිට වඩා හොඳින් උගත් කණ්ඩායමක් විසඳා දේවි. ඒ විසඳුමුත් අරගෙන ආයතනයට සමාජයට හොඳ පණිවිඩයක් ගෙනියන්න ඒවා ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න ඔබතුමාලා සියලු දෙනාට ශක්තිය ධෛර්යය ලැබේවා. බොහොම ස්තුතියි.
Thank you, Minister Siambalapitiya. In synopsis, just to mention for those of you who did not understand, who do not understand Sinhalese, just giving you a synopsis in English. And in fact, there are transcribers, if you like. If you just put your hand up, we can get that for you too. It's in all 3 languages on the different channels. Just raise your arm if you need a transcriber. So just over there. In synopsis, it was the policy of borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, basically bad fiscal management, bad fiscal policies that put us in the eye of the storm. The challenges seemed insurmountable, but there was a plan, and the plan involved ensuring that Sri Lanka raised herself up from the mire. Wheels were set in motion, and currently inflation is reducing. These were the priorities that were put in place. Restructuring debt, restructuring SOEs, ensuring that cost of living is reduced and that exports are improved in numbers, in volume, as well as in quality and quantitatively. And right now, those plans are in place and we keep moving forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. It's now my pleasure to invite to address each of you collectively to make the keynote address, the Honorable Ranil Wickremesinghe, President of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka.
Honorable the Ministers, Members of Parliament, President of the Chartered Institute, distinguished guests and friends. Minister Ranjit Siambalapitiya gave a good description of the economic problems we face today. Therefore, I will not cover that ground again. Today, we are having the first discussion after the announcement of the IMF program. It's being held in a hotel which is a symbol of our first commercial economy, the plantation economy. The British are the ones who carried the transformation from a feudal economy to a commercial economy. The first ventures in coffee collapsed And then came the big transformation of tea, rubber, coconut, and the development of the other industries, services, and of the Colombo port. And this is a symbol where people would come here and discuss issues, firstly the Britishers, later on the Sri Lankans. So that generation in 50 years created a new economy. Now, after independence, the task has come on us, that came on us to continue that work. We have done so well that today our poverty line, people living below poverty, has increased from 12.5 to 25% of the population. There are people who skip one meal. There are 500,000 who have lost their jobs. Many small and medium enterprises on the verge of collapse. What happened? Who's responsible? That answer, not I, sir, but Red Cap will not do. All of us are responsible for the situation we are in today. We must remember that. All of us here, whether we are the politicians, whether we are the business community, whether we are the professionals, whether we are the trade unions, whether we are the civil society, and more than others, whether we are the media, or we are the government administrators, we cannot run away from that responsibility. We must all bear that. If we still continue pointing fingers at each other, we will not succeed. But what matters to us is not merely the IMF program, but also what comes beyond that. So what we have to do now is ensure that the next generation will live in a prosperous society. That's all that the government is seeking to do. The start is difficult, as the minister explained, but nevertheless we have to go along. We cannot by any means move away from it. What is our task? It's not merely to stabilize the economy, but to ensure growth, to grow in this new global economy, and to go ahead. These are facts that we can't get away from. If we are to do this, we must remember that one of the biggest issues that held back our growth is the ethnic issue. We have to think as Sri Lankans. We cannot divorce that issue from the economic issues. There are two E's, as I can see it. And we have to address both those issues. I am not dealing with that issue now. This is not the time or the place. But nevertheless, we have to decide, we have to acknowledge it. Secondly, how do we carry on our discussions at this crucial moment? We are a democracy. Open debate is useful, and it's good that we have members representing government and opposition, the business community, the professions, but we have to discuss and debate these issues. And discussion must take place in the halls of discussion from Parliament downwards, not in the streets. That type of agitation is no longer suitable for a country. It goes on development. But the decision is ours to take, not for the government to enforce. We can only ensure law and order. But otherwise, where do we hold our discussions? That's the second issue. So it's from here that we have to go forward. I will not deal with the details of the IMF package. As you all are all aware, it has many, in addition to what the Honorable State Minister said, there are also other important objectives. It will bring about a significant revenue-based fiscal adjustment based on progressive tax reforms to raise Sri Lanka's revenue to GDP ratio. It's a progressive one so that we gradually reduce the tax burden on the poor who has to bear the brunt of the VAT system. Better public expenditure and debt management through essential institutional reforms. And enhanced social safety net to cushion the poor. Restoring price stability and a market-determined flexible exchange rate, and rebuilding our international reserves. Then ensuring financial stability through a healthy banking system. Now these are some of the key objectives of this IMF reforms, in addition to what the Minister has mentioned. Therefore, what we are seeking is to stabilize the economy by 2026. Come back virtually the same ratios we had in 2019. So we have 7 years to come back to 2019. Is that enough? That is the issue. Anyway, approval of this program will allow Sri Lanka to commence negotiations with private and official creditors on restructuring its debts in line with the parameters set by the IMF Debt Sustainable Assessment, and also the commitments that I have made with my letter of March 14th. We hope to conclude the discussions and arrive at a comprehensive restructuring agreement with the creditors by the time the first review under the EFF in 6 months takes place, in order to keep its part of bargain with the creditors and fully benefit from the debt restructuring. Sri Lanka will need to implement the commitment under its 4 years economic program. So we still have to start the debt restructuring, especially the discussions with our private creditors. From here, do we stop at this stage, do the debt restructuring and the 4-year program? That is not enough. If you want to give a future to your children, if you want to give a future to the youth, then we have to go forward. Because Sri Lanka is today at the crossroads between seizing the opportunity for growth to fix our long-standing institutions and structural problems to become a prosperous society, or denying our problems, rejecting change, and stagnating as a lower middle income country. Implementing this program is how we seize the opportunity for a more prosperous future. We have to deliver this. The dissatisfaction with all our systems, with the government, with the opposition, with the conventional groups, resulted in last year March of young people marching on to Goldface Green, the start of the Aragalaya. Unfortunately, it was taken over by violent extremists. Then what have the young people done? Now they are voting with their feet and leaving the country. So this is what we have to think. Not to study the IMF program and decide we are looking at one, we'll support item 1, we won't support item 2. Are we going to stabilize the industry, create growth, and become a prosperous society? So this is why what is most important in the IMF addition to stabilization is the growth enhancing structural reforms. If we don't do these structural reforms, you can write it out, and next time it's going to be a far more violent uprising. And we must boldly go ahead with these structural reforms, which will unlock our growth potential, put on a high growth trajectory. That's the only way out. So we have to reduce the role of the government in the economy to increase efficient resource allocation, competition and productivity. We must not look at government to bail everything out. We cannot look at government as the ultimate provider of solutions to issues that cannot be resolved by the market. Then further trade liberalization, including rationalizing remaining para-tariffs. The world global economy is going to be more competitive. We have to adjust to it. The labor market reforms which will enable more females to join the labor force. As our population age, it is necessary that more females join the labor force. Remove the impediments to private investment, including by modernizing the regulatory and doing business environment. Reduce electricity costs by improving the generation and the mix and distribution of power generation, leading to an efficient electrical distribution network. Addressing climate change. We have to go through this. There's no way out. If anyone has another system, let them get up and say so. And what I am aiming in the next 2 years to lay the groundwork for a highly competitive social market economy. We have to be competitive. So we'd like to upgrade our FTA with India to economic and technical cooperation agreement and join the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. I don't think we should hesitate. If Laos can join and Cambodia can join, why can't, and Myanmar can join, why can't we join? That's the issue. That means we are going to compete. High level of competition means an efficient government structure. And why do I say it's a social market economy? But we need more money. We can talk our education system covering 90% of the students having 10,000 schools. But what is the quality of education? We need money to make it one of the best education systems in South Asia, or the best education system in South Asia in the next decade. That is social progress. Secondly, the health system. We spend a lot of money on health, but do we get the benefit of every rupee we spend? We need to put more money into it. Into the social safety network, to the poor, to the vulnerable, we have to help them. So that's where we have to get bulk of our money into, not to supporting the Petroleum Corporation or the CEB or Sri Lankan. We wasted too much of our resources on those occasions. So let us look at how we go ahead. Our potential for green economy at the moment is good. Not only renewable energy, but green hydrogen, green ammonia, and many other outputs resulting from this green energy, especially the biomass, which we have not thought of, wave energy. We should get into it immediately, like we got into the apparels as soon as 1978 reform started. A digital economy. Start the digitalization. Start with Western province where 50% of your economy is. Spread out to the other areas of high economic activity, then cover the rest of the country. We have to look at tourism, one which will get us average of $500 a night, 2,000. We can start off with that's a low-hanging fruit. Another low-hanging fruit to agriculture. Our productivity is small. Let us modernize agriculture and fisheries. That's the start of another low-hanging fruit. As far as manufacturing and services are concerned, let's not get there step by step. Let's do one leapfrog into Industry 4, into automation and AI, artificial intelligence. We are suited for both. Then our government money must go to establish the infrastructure for such industries and services. These but some that I can think of. You all can think of more. Sri Lanka becoming a regional logistics center, the offshore potential for the offshore economy. All these are matters to be discussed. So we must take this chance. We can't wait. Because we've been missing on all opportunities for restructuring. When we became independent, Mr. D.S. Sennaika said, let's cultivate let us aim to be self-sufficient in rice. When we save that foreign exchange, we'll be much better off. He also got Sir John Kotara to start the hydroelectricity systems. Then the first round of reforms after that was not introduced by the UNP. The most significant one was Mr. Philip Gunawardana's Paddy Land Act. It was not a communist measure. The Americans had carried out massive land reform pertaining to paddy land in Japan, in South Korea and Taiwan. He just adapted that. And it led to the growth of production in those countries. So he brought that in together with the Agrarian Services Department, and the government had established the People's Bank. It was shut down not by the opposition. It was shut down from within the government, and you have this watered down act which is there today. So we missed the first chance of building up on what Mr. D.S. Sennak had done. The second chance came again in 65 with Mr. Dudley Sennaka's government, the Shenoy report, the starting of industries, the Industrial Development Board, education reforms, increasing productivity, tourism. Some of these were implemented, but the Shenoy report was not implemented. And as a result, we lost the next opportunity. If we had gone ahead with those reforms, it was similar to what Chung Hee Park brought in South Korea and Lee Kuan Yew brought into Singapore. Third round came in 78. President Jayawardena opened up, the economy went ahead, but we had to slow down because of the ethnic situation and the conflict that broke out in the country. Nevertheless, in 1989, the second stage was done by President Premadasa when we pushed ahead, firstly to divest ourselves of some of those corporations which are doing quite well, like Kalani Tyres, and as well as the push for investments both in the apparel sector as well as the tourist sector and a lot of other new industries which we started. But then that came to an end after 1994 as the next government focused completely on resolving the ethnic issue at the expense of the economic development. It went on. So we missed that opportunity. Those who were behind us got ahead of us. Then came, as the minister reminded me, I had forgotten, regaining Sri Lanka. We missed that. So how many more opportunities are we going? We haven't got. This is the last chance. Are we going to take it or not? That's all that you have to decide here. The details you can work out. We have a 6-month review, another 6-month review. But what is in the IMF program, we have to go ahead. But on what we have to, on the growth program, yes, we can discuss that further. And once I bring for, once the debate on the IMF program is over and the resolution is put to vote, thereafter we put out a sketch or a white paper on how the growth should take place. And I'd like the National Council of Parliament to be engaged with the government and for all of us to engage the rest of the sectors of society in determining what our future is going to be. So all I request of you is to make up your mind that we are going to grow. And this is the last chance, and let's press the accelerator to the floor. There's nothing else that we can do. And I ask all of you to join the government in this task we have undertaken. Thank you very much, and thank you for the Chartered Association for sponsoring this event.
Thank you very much, Honorable President, for your keynote address. And we move into the panel discussion now and a Q&A thereafter. For the Q&A, may I request those who do want to send any questions up to any members of the panel at all. A QR code will be up on the screen. Please read the QR code, and once you are in the site, you can write in your questions and send it up. Our moderator will then address it to the relevant member of the panel. Our moderator for the panel discussion is Attorney at Law, a director of multiple listed and unlisted companies, and a renowned marketeer, Mohammed Adamali. I'd like to call him on stage first so that he can welcome our panel. From the panel representing the government, the Honorable Ranil Wickremesinghe, President of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. Could we have Mr. President up on stage? The Honorable Ranjit Siambalapitiya, State Minister of Finance. The Honorable M.U.M. Ali Sabri, Minister of Foreign Affairs. The Honorable Kanchana Wijayasekara, Minister of Power and Energy. Honorable Dilum Amanugama, State Minister of Investment Promotion. Mr. Mahinda Sirivardhana, Secretary to the Treasury and the Ministry of Finance, Economic Stabilization and National Policies. Mr. Sagala Ratnayaka, Senior Advisor to the President on National Security and Chief of Staff. Dr. R.H.S. Samaratunga, Senior Economic Advisor to the President. Mr. Deshal Dimel, Economic Advisor to the Ministry of Finance. For the panel representing the opposition, may I request them to please sit on the left-hand side of the stage. When you face the stage, it will be on the left-hand side, please. The Honorable Eran Wickramaratne, Member of Parliament representing the SJB. Honorable Harsha De Silva, MP, representing the SJB. The Honorable M.A. Sumandiran, Member of Parliament representing the Lanka Tamil Arasakachu. And we did invite the Honorable Kabir Hashim and also a representative from the Janata Vimukti Peramuna, but due to unforeseen circumstances, they cannot make it to today's event. For those members representing the professional bodies and chambers, please sit on the right side as you face the stage. Representing the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce of Sri Lanka, Mr. Vishko Vindasamy, Chairman. Chairman of the Joint Apparel Association Forum, Sri Lanka, Mr. Sharad Amaleen. Representing the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, Mr. Harsha Fernando. Representing the Sri Lanka Association for Software Services Companies, Chairman, Mr. Ali Ashik. Representing the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management, Sri Lanka, President, Mr. Ken Vijayakumar. The Sri Lanka Institute of Marketing President, Mr. Nuan Gamage, who represents SLIM. Representing the Women's Chamber of Industry and Commerce, Sri Lanka, Ms. Anoji De Silva, who is the chairperson. And that, ladies and gentlemen, forms our panel for today. And I now hand it over to Mohammed Adamali, who is our moderator.
Thank you, Savitri. May I say at the outset that the size of this panel is representative of the numbers we have in Parliament.
Adam, just one little interjection, please. We'd like to also invite the President of CA Sri Lanka, Mr. Sanjay Bandara. And Mr. Faisal Samat as well on stage.
All right. At the outset, let me very quickly set out the purpose and scope of today's session. I'll lay it out precisely in order to maximize the 90 minutes that we have for this segment. The purpose is not to make political statements or canvass political ideologies, and I say this not just to the politicians here, but specifically to the audience. The purpose is, in fact, to try and identify clarifications, answers, and generate intelligent responses for the serious concerns and doubts that we have in respect of how we as a nation are to move forward. We are hoping that this forum will provide some clarity and some detail rather than general surface level responses. Pardon me, panelists and audience, I reserve the right to intervene in the event any question or comment derails the objects and scope of this discussion, or if the question or comment is unreasonable in terms of time or goes outside the scope of the point under discussion. To start off, Your Excellency, honorable members of the panel and distinguished panelists, welcome to this panel, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, you set out and identified the scenario in your address. In fact, people have little confidence that we will rise from this abyss. And we believe also that in terms of communication, the state has not done enough to give us this confidence. There is talk of a 25-year plan, which most of us know little about. The youth of this country are fleeing the land, and the brain drain in the last year has been worse than in the worst years of the war. SME businesses are shutting down. General business sentiment is rock bottom. People are scarcely able to survive in the triple whammy of rising taxes, rising costs, and unemployment. Congratulations, sir, on securing the IMF Executive Board approval for the $3 billion loan. We understand from your Harvard interview that you plan to leverage this to raise more aid from our international development partners. In the context of the staggering foreign and domestic debt that we face today, is this reason for celebration? How much more are we planning to borrow? What will our external and domestic debt be in a year and 2 years' time? And is the IMF loan really digging us a deeper hole for ourselves with a false sense of utopia? I wonder, sir, if you might take the first question or hand it to someone in your team to handle.
So we have been through, the full 1 year to reach the final stage on the 20th of this month, the Executive Board approval of the IMF agreement. It started, the middle of last year, middle of March. After 6 months, with the intense debate, discussions, and dialogue with the IMF, we reached, the SLA, staff level agreement on the 1st of September. Then, with nearly 7 months, just less than 1 week, less than 7 months, we were able to come to the finality of the EFF with the IMF. In between, we were asked to comply with implement the certain prior action, 9 prior action of very serious with the very serious reform content. And we have all done, during this nearly 6-7 months. Now that, in the discussion leading up to the 20th of March, the major difficult hurdle was to talk to our external creditors. First, somewhat easy task was to talk to Paris Club members. They came forward to help us in giving their financial assurance. In fact, the first letter came from India, the non-Paris Club member. Then thereafter from China. Chinese letter was, didn't meet, the first letter didn't meet, the expectations of IMF. Subsequently, on the 6th of March, China has written another clarification letter with the additional information and clarifications. And this is how we went through during the last whole year to come to the 20th Executive Board of the IMF. Now that, in the discussion leading up to the discussion, here and there in locally and also the international media raised the question of domestic debt restructuring issues. And in the discussion, that took place nearly a year, we never had, to answer or look at, the domestic debt restructuring. But, probably the international partners, international creditors, bilaterals, and also the private creditors might ask, but, this is too premature for us to, say anything about, the dimension of this one, whether it will come or otherwise, it's too premature for the Sri Lanka government, to say at this stage.
So just to gather from your response in terms of actual debt, where it will stand in terms of foreign debt and domestic debt in the next year and two, are you able to give us anything specific on that, Dr. Samartham?
There is the series of action expected from the part of government. Once we agree on this IMF, EFF, there is a series of action. We had the follow through and the completed with those are time bound actions. Primarily looking at the fiscal consolidation that set the ground for the recovery and the unlocking the growth. That's alone is not sufficient, but that is the basics. Debt restructuring is the one which is which has two parts. If you want to say that the external debt restructuring discussion will begin probably in a month or so. Yeah, probably in a month or so, after April or so. As you will probably know that the experience of other countries like Suriname or Zambia, it's a very difficult, complex process. We all have to agree on, the common, agree on, the common, agree on to a common program, because the common program is the important and also a difficult program. We have the Paris Club bilateral creditors. There are non-Paris Club bilateral creditors like the bigger creditors like India and China. We all have to agree on the common program, which is the international experience suggests that it's a time-consuming thing, but we have to go through and agree on that this is one of the areas which we have agreed with the IMF. This is a time-bound action in a certain time period. We have to complete this debt negotiation to show to the IMF that our debt is sustainable on the sustainable path. But we have not yet discussed this matter when it comes to domestic debt restructuring with anybody. So anybody, because it's since nobody has raised it so far officially, it is in our view it's a premature thing. Thank you.
Would anyone else in the government representation panel like to comment on it before I move the question forward?
Yeah, just to make a few comments on the process. So after the approval of the program, we would be basically starting the discussions with the creditors. So as the first step, we are going to do a presentation today to the creditors. Myself and the governor would be basically leading that. And then by end of April, we have to come up with a proposal, rather process, and will have to be announced to the market. So by then, I hope that there'll be much more clarity on the issues that you raised right now. Just to add that, yes.
I think what ST is saying is what we have received so far are assurances from the bilateral creditors that they're willing to go into a restructuring program. But what it is going to be has not still been worked out, and that is what he is going to start today. And he has a timeline for it. In addition to that, the IMF will also undertake a debt sustainability analysis, which will tell us what kind of, it will take into account our projected revenues and the government expenditure, and based on that, we have to also work backwards to say what we can really afford to pay, also taking account what other finances will come in the form of World Bank DPO program or the ADB programs that will come in. ADB has been, is for the first time, I think, following a different approach. Their program is going to be budget support, which it has never done before, which is also going to be a huge plus for the next few years for us. So when you say budget support, the money comes into the Secretary to the Treasury, and it will be his responsibility to manage it.
Thank you. If we are to give confidence, especially to the younger generation, that they will have a future in this country, then an assessment of the level of debt that we are going to get into in the next few years is going to be, I believe, a critical factor. Dr. Harsha De Silva, do you have any observations on this, and would you like to make any comment with regard to that aspect of the question?
Thank you. I mean, it's confidence that is being built with this whole program. I mean, we can't certainly continue to borrow and borrow and borrow more. We have to bring in investments, and this is a short-term solution that we have. So therefore, if after the restructure, I don't know, various people are saying various things about what the domestic restructure should look like. Some even have said yesterday that maybe we don't need one, depending on what the Chinese may offer. If they offer a 10-year moratorium and a certain reduction in the rates, the coupons, perhaps we can just do some cosmetic changes and sort of squeeze our way through. So there may be multiple ways in which ST and all have devised, Nandalal, some scenarios. But it's really, we need to get back into we need to get the confidence back. That's what is essential. So this is an exercise to rebuild that confidence. So let's hope that we can all find a common ground somewhere so we can move forward.
Yes,
thank you. Could I just, I think to the specific question that you asked in terms of the debt reduction. So at present we are at around 126% of GDP as at the end of last year. It's not going to be a reduction overnight. It's a kind of gradual process. So according to the IMF program, by 2032, in 10 years' time, we need to be down to about 95% of GDP as your debt stock. So that's the kind of pathway, and it's a gradual process. I think there is a debate in the country as to whether it makes sense to be taking on additional liabilities, additional loans, and how that's going to look. Now, I think as Dr. De Silva mentioned as well.
In fact, that is the fear.
That is the fear.
The concern of the great majority is, are we going to borrow further, and how much more are we going to borrow?
Exactly, which is why I said that it's not going to be a reduction overnight. It's a gradual process. The value of an of actual cash that is provided. The value is the confidence that it unlocks. And it is through that confidence being unlocked that Sri Lanka is able to regain access to global markets, not just in terms of capital markets, but even for basic trade finance. Today, the cost of having opening an LC is significantly higher because of this lack of confidence. So this is a key step in terms of enabling that confidence to return. That will help us get greater investments in both in terms of fixed investments, in terms of portfolio investments, and that is what really gets required to recover the economic activity. So I would look at it at that kind of broader lens, and the debt restructuring, the fiscal effort that has been taking place in parallel, that is what will bring down debt over this gradual path over the next 10 years. So that going from 126% to 95% target over 10 years is really where that path is set at.
Thank you. I don't know, Deshal, whether you want to also go in to the framework changes that the government will be making along with the IMF program that would increase to the confidence of investors coming in.
I could touch on that if the
Yes,
moderator
please.
is okay. Absolutely. So I think that confidence is built in. So the IMF program is just 4 years. We know that. But what is important is that we built in a framework of legislations of institutions that are able to instill that confidence over the longer term. So just to take 2 examples for that. One would be the public finance management legislation that is being contemplated. That builds in certain types of fiscal rules that sets out targets in terms of what levels of deficit you can be at over a certain period of time. It builds in obligations on the Treasury to have greater transparency in terms of fiscal management, greater tools in terms of fiscal governance. All of that is very important in terms of building that greater confidence in the fiscal system that we have. Now, we all know that Sri Lanka doesn't have a good track record of implementation of legislation. We've had similar legislation since 2003, the FMRA. So it's important that legislation is combined with institutional independence. So for instance, that is where the central bank's independence, the bill that comes in adds value as well. But I think the third pillar there is public understanding and public confidence. So it's important that the public is also able to understand this reform process, why it is there, and also then to hold government to account over a period of time, so that then actually you're able to allow those legislations to work, allow those institutions to work, and with that public understanding and public support, I think those 3 together are really what we need to take the economy forward.
Thank you. Mr. Sharad Amalin, being the head of JAF, the export body for the apparel sector, what is the reaction of your buyers overseas to us getting this IMF facility, and how do they see Sri Lanka going forward? What is the level of confidence that they have? Has there been any change since the last couple of weeks?
No change. They are still grappling with a demand that is lower than what it was in 2019. But the confidence of the apparel industry has been the fact that we have continued right through COVID and through the economic crisis in the country to deliver, to work. And this was facilitated by the government, making us, giving us the status of essential services during COVID. I think the president will remember when he took over as Prime Minister, he sat with us, and the statement that he made was that we might have more dollars in our safes at home than what the Treasury has. We have come a long way, sir, from that particular time. I think it's important to take this opportunity to say a little bit more about the export industry. But the president did mention some of the points that I would have wanted to echo in this forum. And the fact is that Sri Lanka has to be and so you made this statement, it is a export-led economy. That's what you told us, and that's what you said will be the way forward. You have continued to keep that statement going, and even with the IMF discussions, we know that that's the basis of which all the discussions are taking place, an export-led industry. And the word competitiveness is important. And I must say this, because you can have an export-led economy, but if you're not competitive, and if you're not relevant, you're history. The ease of doing export business is important. And we are seeing changes taking place in the retail environment. We all know today the apparel industry is having its challenges of a 20 to 25% drop in demand. This is worldwide, so there is nothing that anyone can do, nothing to do with the economy or whatever. But the fact remains that we do have SMEs and other industries, small scale industries, in turbulent, or rather challenges in keeping itself going. There is disruption in the retail trade. And so you did mention that we need to be aware of what this disruption is. I'm going to take a minute to digress a bit and mention last week we had lunch with a biggest Chinese exporter from Vietnam and China, and he said, have you heard of this tech company that is selling online only women's apparel called Shein? And we said, no, I'm not sure about it. And he said, it's a tech company that uses data, it uses AI, it uses digital design and technology, all digital tools, and more importantly, it started 6 years ago. First year's turnover, 600 million. 5 years later, $20 billion. This is out of China. It only has 32 floors of all techies. It's like talking to Tesla or Google. All techies, they know jack shit about garments or apparel. But they're a $20 billion business in 5 years. So when we heard this, what did we think? Our apparel industry is history. That's one way of looking at it. The other way is to look at it positively and say, how do we align ourselves? How do we change ourselves? How do we disrupt ourselves the way we are working to be able to be relevant to that tech company? Because that's the future. That company and our neighbors around in the area that we are, that is India for that matter, is taking a cue from that, and you have a lot of startups that are going down that path. I'm going down this story because I want to endorse what you just said earlier, that we got to see the opportunities around us. And our neighbors have invited Sri Lanka to be part of their development. I just want to tell one more thing that this tech company does, and that is logistics. President, you spoke about it, sir. Logistics and shipping. I just believe we need to even open up shipping. You know, and logistics much better than what we are doing now if we want to be relevant. Last part of it is make the ease of doing business, export business easier. There are certain gazettes that have been repealed. Please don't do that. Make it easier for exports. Make Sri Lanka, I agree with the President, we have signed the agreement with the IMF. Let's look forward. Let's make sure that this window that we have, we take the opportunity and look beyond and for export growth and not just Sri Lanka.
Thank you, sir.
I have answered 5 questions in one go, okay?
I was tempted to interrupt you at one point, but it was too interesting to do so. But your question on shipping and logistics, at the moment there are legal restrictions that prevent ownership beyond 40% of those companies to foreign nationals, and the fact of the matter is that shipping is a global business. And under the area of reform that we'll discuss a little later in the question sector, perhaps we can bring that up. The buzz, dirty word today is taxes, and so I'll switch on to that topic, and I'd like to address this to Mr. Sanjay Bandara from CA Sri Lanka. In my chat with you earlier on, sir, you voiced the opinion that quite apart from your membership being itself adversely affected by the current tax structure, you are the custodians of the financial performance and financial planning of the companies and businesses that you all work in. And you mentioned that you were struggling with, that your membership was struggling with having to make business look viable in these circumstances. What are your major concerns, and what specific questions would you have that you need clarity on in this regard, in the area of the taxation policy of this country? And I'm talking of tax policy of this country.
On that, my question goes to Dr. Samarathunga and Mr. Siruwadana. As per the recently released IMF report, Sri Lanka is expecting to have a 15% tax to GDP by 2026. At the moment, it is around 8.2%. And last year, we had a contraction in the economy around 8.5%, and this year, we're expecting a contraction around 3%. And next year, we are expecting a growth around 1+, 2024, 2+, sorry, 2025, 2+, 2026, 3+. In that context, contribution to tax to GDP of 15% from GDP growth rate is going to be not that significant. Does it mean that, we will continue with the current tax system and the rates for another 4 years? Is my first question. The second question is whether government intend in introducing new taxes within next 2 to 3 years, because the corporate world require this information for their planning purpose. And I would request Dr. Harshada Silva and Mr. Mantira and Mr. Ranukamat also to share their observations on their comments. Thank you.
Perhaps, Doctor, if you can take the question first.
Our taxation system worked very well when we were really poor in 1960s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. The tax to GDP ratio was above 20% when we were really poor. But when we crossed the border of the middle income country, the relative significance of taxation to GDP has gone down, over the last nearly 3 decades or so, from mid-1990s. Apparently, the government of those days may not have, the thought of, the significance of keeping up with, the certain level of revenue to run a government. Now, we are in a negative territory. As you rightly say, we are in a recession. The economy has contracted by 7.8% last year and another 3, probably this year. And even if you, cross zero, the positives may not be, that big enough to, raise, the revenue. But, your denominator is, the smaller now. Therefore, if you have to bring about, the 15% or above, of course, it's difficult. But there is no other way other than, the raising revenue to meet, the essential government expenditure, because, the situation, the conditions and the circumstances are such that, there won't be, you cannot, afford to continue with, the mismanaged economy anymore. Therefore, we have to be rigid, but certainly, to answer your question, that we have, the additional taxation or new tax. I would say that, we have, the Sri Lanka has lost large quantum of revenue outside the taxation system. Honorable President continued to keep us telling, all the time, probably, the last 6 to 8 months, there is a system of revenue which government has not, properly looked at for the last so many years. We don't have, the system of collecting those revenue, which we have ignored for about from mid-1970s. We had a good system of revenue collection system from, from the village level all the way up to, the governor, British governor during the British regime. But, somehow in the early 1970s with the taxation reform, we made the Inland Revenue an independent exclusive body for the collection of revenue. But there are large amount of, the revenue, non-tax revenue, which remains, the uncollected and, the not looked at properly by anybody in this country. There is no, the people who can, share information at the village level or above with the income tax department. Income tax department is centrally located in districts and, in the center. But during the good olden days, we have, the village headmans, we have, the divisional revenue officers. We have abandoned that part completely. Therefore, the large amount of non-tax revenue remains in the economy uncollected. That is the area probably, we may want to, look at seriously in raising, the additional revenue to meet, this 15%. Of course, in the taxation sector, it's obvious, and also, all the time, we are blamed, the government is blamed for not collecting revenue from those individuals and companies and, the entities which should definitely pay, the taxes. There is, the major lacuna, administrative lacuna in the system as well. But probably we need, the additional laws to, catch them as well. And the other measure probably, we want to reactivate, augment, and, the deepen is, the electronic methods, using electronic methods to collect, the tax based on existing legislation. With those ones, probably, and since the denominator is, the small, we may not be able to, the far off from 15% by, the 2026, 2027. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, just to add what Dr. Samaratunga mentioned is that, yes, you're right. Because last year, in nominal terms, we saw about 37% increase in revenue, total revenue. It's about close to 500 billion. Even though we had this 7.8% contraction in the economy. That was also supported by the policy measures that we implemented and also the efforts made by the revenue agencies, particularly in the department. But this year it's going to be different. We have a little high target in terms of revenue, and contraction is going to be lower, but at the same time, the inflation impact will also be lower this time. According to central bank's expectation, we will be basically, seeing some single-digit level inflation towards this end of this year. So if that is the case, then as you correctly mentioned, this inflationary impact would not be there. as we experienced last year, but there'll be partly, it will be affecting as well. But then the question is how you get this lost or revenue out there into the government coffers is the key issue. So then we have already implemented the policy measures. Then the next step would be to strengthen the tax administration. We are a country which had about maybe sometimes more than 22% of revenue in the past, about maybe 2-3 decades ago. But as a result of these concessions, complexities in the tax administration, weaknesses in the tax administration, all sort of things have affected to the total revenue collection, and it has now come to around 8.2% of GDP. In fact, it was the case in 2021. It remained the same, almost same in 2022 as well, despite the effort that we took. Then, how we get into the 15% of revenue target within maybe 3-4 years is the question, as you very correctly indicated. Then, we will have to go through all these exemptions. If you go through the IMF report, they have specifically mentioned that some of the exemptions will have to be very carefully removed. And then the tax administration will have to be implemented, particularly, use of IT systems. We have to reduce or remove the human intervention and human touch. And then you have to improve the use of this new electronic and other, IT-based solution and system. We have given, emphasis to that. We already have, had discussions, a number of discussions with the Inland Revenue Department and other, revenue collecting agencies, how we basically use this as a tool to get many people into the tax net, and then at one point we would be able to reduce the high tax rates going forward. And it has to be come as a result of, broadening of the base. So those are the kind of areas that we have to touch if you are to, get this revenue going forward during next maybe 3 to 4 years.
Thank you, gentlemen. Your answers focused in the main on the tax collection mechanism and the increasing of the tax net, which is certainly an important and relevant factor. On the question of the tax policy itself in terms of the existing tax structure, I mean, we hear, for instance, of the reintroduction of the inheritance tax in the pipeline. Now, these are all matters of concern to people out here in the audience. We already are taxed substantially on income. We have huge levels of indirect taxation on every product that you buy. Is this tax structure going to continue into the next few years? If so, for how many years? And what new taxes can we expect in the next few years as well? I believe this will be critical for organizational business planning, for personal planning as well. So, Mr. Deshaltimel, would you like to handle that and give us some idea on this?
Sure. So I think it's important, first of all, to focus on core taxes so that you don't have a plethora of measures that add complexity to an already difficult business environment, right? So when I say core taxes, I mean corporate and personal income taxes, VAT, and co-excise. Co-excise means excise on tobacco, alcohol, petroleum, and so on. So those would be do the heavy lifting in terms of tax collection. Now, beyond that, of course, Sri Lanka is in a situation where we need to have a fairly steep revenue enhancement in a relatively short period of time, especially in the context of where we are asking our global counterparties, be they the IMF or our external creditors, we are asking our external creditors to take losses on the loans that they have extended to Sri Lanka. So in that sense, we also need to demonstrate a material fiscal effort from our side to make it, ensure that they are also willing to participate in this process of reducing our debt. So that is where, in addition to these core taxes, we also require some further measures. Those measures need to be progressive. When I say progressive, what I mean is measures where the tax burden is shouldered by the wealthy, those who can afford it, as opposed to indirect taxes where the burden falls disproportionately on the poor. So in this context, that is where they are exploring measures which have been captured as wealth taxes. Now, this is, because these are new measures, they require a degree of analysis, a degree of work before they are rolled out. And that process will commence now in terms of identifying what type of taxes are appropriate in this context. How are those taxes? How do they strike the balance between generating revenue whilst avoiding disincentivizing the deployment of capital? because that's an important trade-off that we have to take in mind. And that requires a bit of runway in terms of analysis, in terms of research to get that across. So that process is going on now. That is why we have left it until 2025 for these measures to be introduced. So the idea is where you're ensuring that any new measures are progressive and strike that appropriate balance.
Can I say a few words on inheritance taxes? In this country, we had wealth tax and estate duty. Until about 1987 or so, I have paid wealth tax. When my father passed away, we had to pay estate duty. What we decided was, by 1977, the whole capital base, which was built up, as I said, from 1850 onwards, was destroyed. There was nothing left. Houses were taken over, estates were taken over. And to build up the capital base, the first issue that President Jayawardena did was he took on these big construction projects. Mahavali allowed many of the Sri Lankans to come back into as businessmen with capital, whether it was subcontractors or subcontractors to subcontractors, whether it would supply goods. But the total of Mahavali and the Kotte capital project was to give back capital. Secondly, we felt that we could accelerate it with the war going on if we suspended inheritance tax and estate duty for some time. Well, it got suspended, but it was never introduced again. And now, as the IMF says, a capital formation has come into being now. It's very, very big. We have a big capital formation here. We have others outside Sri Lanka. So when you're looking at progressive taxation, they said you could bring this back. If you want to know what high-level taxes are, how about paying ordinary people paying 60% of the tax? And then if we had anything left over, more than 2,500, which was a lot in those days, minister's salary was about 1,000 rupees. We had 2,500 left. Anything more than 2,500, it was put into basically compulsory savings. I used to work for Mr. Ambalawana, and we had a thriving practice telling people how to avoid paying this to the ceiling on taxes. So we've come a long way, and I think with all the issues, our taxes are certainly more progressive than it was early.
Would you be still consulting, sir?
Well, looking at the gentleman here, if you are willing to pay on the side, I'll have to do it. What else? I have paid very little as president. This is the only way to add to my remuneration.
The Honorable Era Murata and Mrs. Honorable Mrs. Suman.
Just on this imposition of wealth tax, I don't know why the imposition has been postponed. I'm asking this question because while we are told that there will be wealth tax and it will come someday, the poor have been forced to pay taxes in various forms because this is an indication of the disparity. See, everybody knows that we have to pay more taxes. There's no question about that. But in taxation, there has to be a very strict yardstick on fairness. So that fairness index is still not achieved, I think, and that's an area to look at. Last budget cycle, when the budget debates were going on, Honorable Iran Vikramaratne, myself and a few others, publicly proposed a different tax structure that doesn't impact on the poor. Now, we did a public, demonstration of how that can be achieved and so on. Doesn't seem to have been taken on board. Now, I'm saying that also because I agree with the President that all of us have to do this together. And the discussion must happen here, not on the streets. But if the discussion is not to happen on the streets, then it must happen here. It must, already in this forum, Harsha had a half a minute say, and now I'm put my hand up and I'm saying something, right? So if this is a forum where the government just explains and goes away, then it's not a robust discussion at all. And it won't achieve that particular objective that we discuss openly, transparently, and go together. I also agree with the President that the ethnic issue, as he mentioned, must be resolved. And you can't say we'll do it after the economic crisis is over. No, it won't happen in that way. It's intrinsically connected. As we speak, we have a massive public protest going on in Batticaloa. We have another massive public protest going on in Mana, and even bigger protest happening in Vaunia. How many of us even know that it is happening? So, the archaeology department is running amok, right? And I just looked at the logo of the archaeology department. It's a Dagaba and the Dharma Chakra. Now, is that the only archaeology relevant to this country? Right? So, the fairness question and the public support, particularly to pull us out of a difficult economic situation, you must have the support of everybody, and that's not just only economical support. It's a perception and an understanding that everybody is being treated equally and fairly. And that is severely lacking, and we are willing to participate in these discussions if we know that our suggestions and our views will be taken on board. And all of those would be constructive suggestions, I can assure you.
In fact,
and I, okay.
Yes.
Far as I am concerned, I have said Sri Lanka's economic question has two E's. Both have to be resolved. Our first priority was getting the IMF agreement. But in the meantime, there were parallel discussions with the representatives of the Tamil from the north and the east. And we have come to agreements now which we will start working on just after Sinhala New Year holidays are over to implement it. I know the one in Vaunia is about the destruction of the temple. That's one which you've asked the police to investigate. And secondly, yeah, archaeology, we had one meeting in Vaunia, we had one meeting here, but there are still problems with archaeology, and there are other problems with forest department, which applies both to the north and to the north central province and Monaragala. So we will be looking at those issues next week. In addition, now we want to start on system B. A part of it would be for the companies that are looking for land to export food to Singapore and as well as Middle East. The rest will go to the people of Eastern Province. And that will be fairly substantial. Then there are the other issues which we will be resolving in time to come.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honorable Mr. Sumandiran, in fact, that was going to be a question of mine as to the reaction of the North and East in your view to the tax proposals and the level of cooperation that can be expected from it. But you've already addressed a bulk of that on the concept of the perception of fairness being a key player in the acceptance of proposals of this nature. Is there anything further you wish to comment on before I hand over to the Honorable Eran Wickramaratne for his observation?
Just one matter. As the President said, we're having discussions together, and I only hope that we move forward in that without postponing those reforms as well. We've also had discussions with regard to how the North and East can contribute towards the economic growth, because there is a high level of potential there. So we've looked at special development funds, different kinds of investments coming in, all of that. And we will cooperate with the government with regard to realizing all of that, because, as was mentioned by you and others at the beginning of this discussion, IMF bailout package and thereafter the borrowings will only make us more into debt, take us more into debt. For growth to happen, there has to be a a plan that sort of pulls us out of this, of this mess. And for that, investments are key. And there is great potential if we target certain areas and address those issues. That's one. The other is the corruption susceptibilities was one of those concerns that IMF mentioned. Now, the President mentioned regaining Sri Lanka effort. But, during that time, there were two privatized ventures that were reversed. Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation and Lanka Marine Services Limited. I was counsel for Mr. Vasudeva Nanayakara in both those cases. Because there were those two cases, those were reversed. How many more went unaddressed? Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation, the asset was valued at 6 billion when it was in fact more than 125 billion. So, you start on this process. I agree with the President, the state can't do business, but you start divesting, the huge opening for corruption.
I'm coming into the SOE question.
Can I tell you on that? Firstly, for North, we are coming up with a big development plan for North, and North will be the biggest beneficiary of green hydrogen. I think that will really catch up on, North will be able to catch up on many of the other provinces. So is the East with development of Trincomalee and the tourism. The other one will be the NCP, again with its potential for modernized agriculture. As far as insurance was concerned, it was transparent. And we sold it. Now we took it back. If you ask the chairman insurance, the company could have got far more in insurance now. I think you have lost Ronald, you have lost your lead in some of the sectors. Okay, we've got to decide at the end of the day, are we going ahead or not? There's no fraud. It was a question of valuation. This will come again in this instance. So we've got to either make up our mind. Are we going to privatize or not? That's what we have to do. If the courts want to interfere, then the courts must find the money. That's all I can say.
I will come on to the question, sir, on SOE. Just as you say, the privatization is necessary. I think it is the process that is in question. The process and the transparency, accountability and transparency in that process, that is the matter in issue here. Honorable Eran Wickramaratne, would you like to comment specifically on the tax matter before we move on to the matter of government expenditure and SOEs?
I won't want to specifically comment on the tax matter, I must say that. And the reason is, this is IMF and beyond. And in the President's speech, he said, rather than looking at all the little details, I think being a preliminary discussion, it's better to talk about the big issues. I have been critical on details, not on the principle, even on tax. And the reason for that is, economics and finance cannot be looked independent of the socio-political reality. This is a country which has had violence every 25, 30 years, and there have been cycles, and therefore we need to have a buy-in, so with protection of the poor and taxation. So I won't get into the details of that. But the government has taken progressive measures, independence of the central bank, the law has come into parliament, and I would say that, of course, it should go back to more like the 2019 draft of it, and amendments should be moved in parliament. Uninterrupted fuel and energy, Kanchana Minister has been doing things. Later in the media that Ruwan Wijewardena has been having discussions, post-COP27, I presume, sustainable energy, absolute must, foreign investment, absolute must. Some people are trying to thwart it because the cost cannot be brought down in any other way, and we want to see that happen. SOE reforms just referred to, transparency, absolute must, regulation has to be strengthened. These are the two basically pillars for SOEs. I won't get into the details of that either. Education, select committee in parliament, trying to build a consensus among parliamentarians. The system must be opened. This nonsense of keeping a closed system won't work. 28 foreign students in all Sri Lankan universities registered in 2022. Malaysia had 50,000. So let's all get together. This has to be absolutely changed. And then I would say there has been an office set up for overseas Sri Lankans. It's a welcome move. Overseas Sri Lankans are the biggest asset this country has. Education, investment, skills. And we have to actually bring them back here. And this is something we all can actually get together, and that office has been set up. I think we need to look at it. I would like to just make 3 quick suggestions, because I listened carefully to Sherrod. The issue for government is building confidence. Confidence is a major issue. The rest of it, we should leave it to the private sector and to the community rather than the government trying to say what to do and so forth. In that, I would say one of the suggestions is, going beyond tax, is really looking at a unified fiscal authority. So you have customs, excise, inland revenue all coming. Some things you have to do in 6 months, as the officials have been showing, some in 2 years, some will take 5 years, but we have to start now. And that will help in many ways. One is the number of taxpayers, the net will increase, revenue will increase. I'm not going into the details that the Secretary referred to. And also corruption will reduce, because your interaction with the customs and so forth and so on will come down, because they take care of clearing, unified authority gets the revenue. Case studies are there for other countries, how they have got that. I would say we need to think, because this said IMF and beyond, I'm not thinking of the IMF program, I'm thinking way beyond that and saying this something needs to be done. The second thing I would say is public sector reform. In the last period with the IMF, we did fiscal consolidation based on revenue. I'm saying we have to look at cost as well. I'm looking at public confidence. The public are saying we are paying taxes, what's happening with our taxes, see all the inefficiencies, the service levels we get, etc., etc. We need to look at that. Therefore, there are things that we don't discuss, even in this round with the IMF. I don't know what the internal discussions were, but the expenditure side, defense expenditures, one of the highest in Asia, nearly 10%. India is 9%. All of the Asian countries are less than 5%. We have to absolutely look at public sector reform on the expenditure side. And finally, I would say this. Again, I'm talking about public confidence, right? People are concerned. Investors locally and overseas, businessmen are concerned about the levels of corruption in this country. It's basically at every level corruption is there. And therefore, we need to deal with it. And I'm saying up front, there's a conflict of interest here. You're a minister, you're advised by the Attorney General's department. You rob, they have to prosecute you. Cases have been put, cases have been withdrawn. And there are decades of experience in this. And therefore, we need to be radical, like countries like Hong Kong. And we need to look at not just bringing the law, because I know the President, Mr. Vijaydas Rajapaksa, have agreed to bring in the law. Laws have been drafted. But we need an independent public prosecutor who will actually go after this. And the reason I'm putting these suggestions, I'm looking beyond the IMF agreement. We need to build long-term confidence so that this country's direction will not be reversed.
Can I say a few words? I've enjoyed being here, but I've got to now attend another function. But this is called the dialogue. So I think let the dialogue begin. I think the officials, I must say in fairness to them, have explained how the system is working. And we have opened it out, the IMF program, for discussions with everyone. And certainly when we are revising it once every 6 months, there's more space for discussion. But we'd like everyone to be involved in the growth strategy, which will be presented thereafter. So I will leave it to the compeer to ensure that there is certainly there's a dialogue going on, and I'd entrust Foreign Minister Ali Sabri to lead the government side. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. We thank His Excellency for the time this morning to engage in this dialogue. Before we move into the area of government expenditure, which is the next subject that I would like to cover in this, and there are a lot of questions from the audience already on this that I have received. Ms. Anuji De Silva, you work with the Women's Chamber, and a lot of your work is with entrepreneurs, startups in the rural sector and things. Is there any impact of the tax law on them? And if not, what is the most pressing issue that they face from an economic perspective?
So,
unfortunately, we don't have enough women representation on this panel, for sure, and that doesn't augur very well for what the Honorable President stated earlier in his address about gender equality and gender representation. But over to you, tell us.
yes, so I think despite being given a seat in the opposition, I think we all owe our gratitude to the President, because he's taken the country at a very difficult time, and he's actually delivered the promise of getting IMF to sign with us, which I think is a huge achievement. And like he said, it's up to us now as citizens of this country to put the country first and actually to contribute to get us out of this situation. So we do deal with a lot of the micro-level people, and one of the biggest problems they have is not tax. It's the confusion that they are in, trying to understand what has happened to this country. Because they don't understand, they just listen to what different people say, and they are completely confused. So just to take the liberty to explain, we explain it to them in a very simple manner. We take this analogy of a family that suddenly finds itself that maybe the trusted husband has run through all the money of your family and you're bankrupt. And in a situation like that, what we tell them is, okay, your initial instinct is to figure out how you can increase the income of your family. You're not going to waste time complaining about being disruptive. You're going to focus on how to increase the income of your family, plus how to reduce the expenditure, because that's the only way for you to survive. You can go to maybe a few relatives, like what you do with the IMF, to get a short-term facility, but you have to pay that back. And unless you do this, you cannot get out of it. So by saying that, what we are trying to do actually is to put them in the right mind space, because the people of this country are very confused at the moment. They don't really understand, and I would like to request the government ministers, we need to have a campaign to approach these simple people and to explain to them the situation we are in, because otherwise they're thoroughly confused. And the next step that we do is, actually the biggest problem they have is the debt trap they have got into. Because when the interest rates were very good, they went and borrowed at 7% without realizing some of those are also variable interest rates. And now they can't manage the debt they are in. So that's actually the biggest problem they have, not tax. So that has to be something also the government has to help them to get out. And the third is really the ease of doing business, because the SME sector is a contributor to this country. They are not a burden to the country. They contribute the largest GDP to this country, largest number of employment, but they get very little assistance for the ease of doing business. I mean, I'm in the process of writing to Minister Kanchana to help one of our entrepreneurs who's waiting for 4 years to get bulk electricity because of a petition her electorate had sent, and she's about to relocate to Dubai. So this is how we lose our exceptional entrepreneurs. So Adam, I think just to say, these are the real issues the SME sector face. Tax is something that they are not thinking about at the moment.
Thank you, Anuji, for enlightening us on that segment. It's a segment that's often missed and very valuable input indeed. Moving on to government expenditure, transparency, and financial accountability. The flip side of being taxed is that we suddenly wake up and we want to know that our tax money is working, and we take a greater interest in this aspect. And so, once again, this is a matter that's very much in the limelight. The IMF staff level report has this to say: risks to program implementation are exceptionally high, given the complex debt restructuring process, unfavorable external environment, elevated risks of persistently high inflation, and challenging political and social situation. Given Sri Lanka's weak track record of reform implementation, the program runs significant risks of slippages regarding financial consolidation, revenue mobilization, and reserves buildup. I think that is a fabulous summary of where we stand. Sagarata says where we stood. Let us see whether we have actually moved on from there. We have not seen, and the state has not communicated to us, any plan or target for the reduction of government expenditure and any process of how that will be achieved. And I believe, really, while work seems to be happening, part of the problem is the lack of communication of what is happening. Anuji, you mentioned that at an SME level, and I think that is true to say of the entirety of the populace here. What steps are being taken to reduce government expenditure? Concrete steps. To reduce the employee count in the state sector. Reduction of sectors like, for instance, the armed forces. After the end of the war, we saw an increase in the armed force cadre rather than a reduction, notwithstanding reports to the contrary by many of the commissions that were appointed for that purpose. And what is the timeline or the plan for this? If someone from the state, Honorable Ali Sabri, if you wouldn't mind leading that on or directing it to someone who can take that question, and then we'd like to hear from the business sector.
Yeah,
as well.
Mr. Ratnayaka on the defense and then
Okay. Speaking specifically on the defense side, you said the numbers increased. It's not that the numbers increased, but a right-sizing program didn't kick in. So we've started discussing that. There's been an automatic right-sizing program that has commenced. It's not an intentional one. Government recruitment stopped, which went across the board to the three forces and the police. I don't say that's a good thing, because there will be certain gaps in skill when that happens. But also there have been depreciation, automatic depreciation. We have about 2,500 soldiers going out of the system on a monthly basis. That's been taking place, and those have brought the numbers down, but that doesn't answer your question. Are we going into a conscious program? Yes, we are designing the program right now. We've started the discussion with the three forces, but more importantly, we are working out our defense strategy at the moment. And that is required to work the numbers backwards. We will be finalizing the defense strategy in the next 3 to 4 months, and then we will work the numbers backwards. But also going into government expenditure, I know it does look extravagant most of the time, but if you take a regional number, we are at about 20% of GDP. This is still lower than most of our peers in the region. This is not to say that we are not going into expenditure control. Of course we are, and I think ST will probably be the best to respond to this. But but those numbers by itself are not going to help us to come out of this. But it will be a really feel-good factor for the people, it'll give people more confidence when we do that.
Thank you. And I trust there is also a plan that is being put into process to communicate these matters to the public, which I believe is one of the biggest drawbacks of policy at the moment.
Adam, I will just
Ali?
also, before the ST says, overall, if you look at it, there is also misperception and also about the communication. 70% of our budget went for payment of capital and interest. Out of last 7 billion, 70% went for payment of loans, capital and interest. And if you look at the government expenditure, including parliament, ministers and everything, as a percentage of the budget is 0.07. 0.07. So you reduce that doesn't mean that you are going to change the whole thing, but you still have to do it. But there are problems with us. Our public service is 1.5 million, which works out to 1 for 60. In India, 177 to 1. In Pakistan, 144 to 1. In Bangladesh, 117 to 1. In other words, Sri Lankans, 16 of us have to pay tax to maintain a public service. Whereas in India, 177 has to pay. That's a problem. We need to look at it. I think perception about it. There were cases when we were when government was offering graduate training to them, there were girls and boys who were well employed in the private sector with 200,000 salaries, willing to give up that and come and get this government salary for 50,000 rupees. About the perception, at 23, at a 22, 23, they are looking at about their pension. No, as a percentage, this is a problem. We all have to work together. If you look at the percentage of Vietnamese into entrepreneurship, is about 16 to 17%. In Sri Lanka, it's just 6%. So people are not willing to take risk. So we all need to work together to create that perception. And one area we have been bleeding is about this SOE reform. I'm good that every one of us are in the same page that SOE reforms need to take place, but it has to be transparent, agreeable. So that's what I think everybody is working on. It has to be transparent, open, competitive, and it should be on the public domain. And so it's good. For example, I think we have called for EOI to build a refinery in Ambantota. The minister put that all 7 EOI, these are the guys who have brought in. So some are giving the perception that it is ministers' companies or something. It's not. So we have called for EOI, people have applied for it, there are 7. Out of that 7, people are giving about that's good. So people are now, that is because it is in public domain and Google searches are also available, people are going and looking at it and saying these are the companies. So one way of reducing that is also going for SOE reforms. So we have to, I think, some or other pursue that across the party line. I think what happened in India after the 1991, parties have changed. BJP had come, and we all know BJP's policies diametrically opposed to the Congress policies. In between, there were leftists also a coalition. But from 1991, more or less, they have continued the same economic policies. Unfortunately, we have not been able to do that. So in 2000 government, President Wickremesinghe, he probably withdrew the pension in order to reduce the attractiveness of the government service and push them to the private sector. But the next government came in and reintroduced it. So that's why it's important across the party line, we have to have some sort of agreement. Despite the government changes, these economic reforms and policies must continue. So it is in that sense, I think a lot of actions have been taken, but communication need to be good, it has to be consistent. Parties must work across the board and across the party line to see it through. So I would also ask Mr. Sirivardhana if you can just give what are the specifics we have taken to reduce it.
Let's hear that from Ms. Sivadan and then move on to Dr. Harsha De Silva.
Just to make a comment on the expenditure, yes, I fully agree with the fact that, if you are basically raising the revenue, we have to spend all these revenues in a responsible manner. So we have taken that very seriously, especially from last April, almost 1 year. I have been there in the Ministry of Finance. I can assure you that we have been very careful in allocating expenditure as well as issuing imprests to particular expenditure items. I don't know whether you know about that. In fact, I have previously indicated in several occasions about the revenues that we are getting. It's around 160, 170 billion for a month. But out of that, we spend almost 93, 94 billion to pay the salaries, and another maybe 30, 35 billion to pay the pensions and the samurdhi, and another maybe 7 to 10 billion for the payment of medicine. So you are left with maybe around 20, 25 billion to do all the other things. Capital, be it the capital or interest payments and various other things. For interest payment, we would be basically, reissuing some of the instruments, but this is the status of the expenditure, at least during the last 1 year period. But if you see the entire numbers, entire yearly numbers, as indicated earlier, it's around, previously 20% of GDP, which is, compared with the peer countries, it's not that high. But last year, due to our, these serious efforts, it has come down to around 18.5% of GDP, which is a very good achievement in terms of, revenue expenditure management. For example, the other goods and services, which is the key items that could have leakages in general, it has come to around 0.% of GDP. But the only factor that went out of control last year is the interest payments. It's about 6% of GDP previously, but it increased to 6.5% of GDP. It is because of that. In fact, if you take the non-interest expense, that's the primary balance. In fact, under the IMF, it was only 4%, but we ended up with 3.7%. We overperformed the primary balance target. But that 3% of GDP is also as a result of the 1% of debt that was given to the CPC. In fact, they didn't paid it back, because we lent about 700 million US dollars. It is about 252 billion, which we got through the Indian line of credit. CPC did not pay us. We included all this into our accounts. So as a result of that, primary balance ended up as 3.7, but if not for that, we would have ended in 2.7%. You can imagine, within 1 year period, about 300 percentage point increase as a result of this effort that we have taken. But at the same time, these things achieved as a result of, very strict control and also the monitoring. We issued number of circulars, starting from, I think, April 26 last year. And we issued specific circulars to the government line ministries and also state-owned enterprises. And we, stopped recruitment. We stopped most of the activities. Stopping these, some of the capital expenditure will have an impact on the growth. But you have to prioritize the actions that you are basically, taking in a situation like this. Don't forget that we are in a crisis right now. Still we are in a crisis, because I am the person who is seeing all the numbers almost every day. You don't know the effort at the Treasury, especially the Treasury Operations Department, is making to, ensure that government payments are made on time and we are not going to collapse. So that's the situation. This is not a normal situation. That's why I'm listening to some of these comments. I see that in a normal situation, those things would be okay, but you have to prioritize and you have to, take some of the actions which may not be taken in a normal times. But since we are in a crisis situation, we will have to take some of this decision. So that's my broader comment on that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Harsha De Silva, you had an observation to make.
Yeah, I just want to mention to Sabri that, we have always been in this position, right? Like Ranjit just accepted earlier on. The political ideology was different. We have always been in the position that we are currently also and into the future. And if you sort of go through the blueprint that our party tabled in Parliament, it is very much consistent with what the president said in terms of reforms. But we believe in a social market economy where, on the one hand, while we have to work with markets, we believe in competition, we also believe in social justice and equity. So these are things that we need to fine-tune. But ideologically, I must tell you, we are aligned. Now, he talked about two reports, the Shenoy report of 1966. I mean, that was defeated because Dadi Sennaika thought that Jayajawardena was going to unseat him. That's an internal matter. Because the Shenoy report wanted the rice subsidies taken out, right? And he thought the rice subsidies taking out would mean what happened earlier in the Hartal, and that he may have to be unseated. But the Gok and Swi report, I think in 1978 or 79, somewhere there, both referred to fiscal dominance of monetary policy. See, that is the thing we really need to understand, because I just looked at the numbers in the IMF appendix. Interest alone for 2022 was 89% of tax revenue. Interest alone. So if you add capital, that is coming to about 140% of tax revenue. So where are we going to cut? Sure, we spent a bunch of money, 950 billion or something in salaries, half of that for the forces and the police. There's some amount that we can perhaps save in by cutting capital expenditure and all of that. But fundamentally, the elephant in the room really is the interest on debt. So unless we move ideologically from where some of the political parties were and some still continue to be, to what we have been sort of professing for a long time, we cannot get out of this problem. For instance, let us look at the idea that the Jayasundaras and the Lakshmans and the Cabrals professed, where they said, look, let us cut taxes and let us get the central bank to finance the expenditure. That we very vocally criticized as modern monetary theory at the time, which no country, not even America now we see with the inflation rates in the US, hitting 40-year highs, was not sustainable even in a country that, had their own currency and borrowed in their own currency. So it was never possible here. So one thing we must understand is taxes need to be collected by the state, because the expenditure now, what we incur, is actually not enough. We have to spend more. We have to cut in certain areas, but we have to spend more in other areas, right? So in that context, we have to at some point become sustainable, where we run perhaps a small deficit, if at all, but certainly run the surplus on the primary account, so that we can sustain this thing, right? So ideologically, we must come to the agreement that this has to balance, and taxes must be fairly in line with what we spend. So that's the point I want to make.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that was fairly clear in your perspective on this. If we can move to a related area of transparency. Mr. Harsh Fernando from the Bar Association, you're here representing them today. Any thoughts on how we can, increase the aspect of transparency in government dealings, in government expenditure, in SOE privatization? And if we can also link that up with the entire area of the talk of SOE privatization, we have almost 100 billion rupees being, 1,000 billion rupees rather being spent and lost by the combined forces of the CPC, the CEB, the Sri Lankan Airlines, Airport and Aviation Services. That bleeding needs to stop, and stop now. We're talking of privatization, but we're talking of privatization of the more profitable assets, Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation, for one. Your thoughts on transparency, including that aspect, please.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think we can take transparency as a standalone issue. I think transparency is just one of the elements in your overall anti-corruption drive. So I think one of the things that we see that could be improved is minimize the separation between anti-corruption and decision-making. You sort of tend to keep it as two things. No, it has to be merged into one. So if you follow proper procedures, if you go according to the laws, if you follow proper procedures, and the decision-making is done the way it should be done, broadly we call it governance, then transparency will automatically come. But I think the bigger issue in terms of transparency is, I think you spoke a lot about tax revenue, and people are very upset about the loss in disposable income because of taxes, professionals included. But what is our connection to the public financial management processes of this country? We don't have any bridges to know that. Somebody makes a decision, and we are takers, and the bill is given, now pay for this. Even if you look at, for example, the Auditor General's report, it finally goes to the Parliament, but it doesn't get connected to the Bribery Commission, or to the Inland Revenue Department, or to the FIU, or to the Public Service Commission to deal with errant officials, or to the Auditor General's office, where you can ask them to pay the loss that they caused because the decisions officials made that were wrong. So that we see that a systemic approach to deal with anti-corruption together with these reforms is not taking place. So even, I think now the anti-corruption law, along the lines of UNCAC, United Nations Convention Against Corruption, is being drafted. But I think we all know that there's a big difference between having a pristine statute
and the implementation.
And seeing it implementation on the ground.
Exactly.
Now, for that to get implemented, everybody who is linked in the process, there has to be a change in their attitudes, increase in their capacities, the way we approach. If you look at not only the IMF, you look at the UNHCR, for the first time, anti-corruption, bribery, recovery of stolen assets has come to the center stage. Now, those are the pressure points that we as a country is facing. So we need to bring it to the center stage and deal with those. So decision-making, so transparency alone, I think is a very narrow way to look at the issue. I would rather say you look at it as a broad governance, which includes anti-corruption, proper decision-making, public financial management, transparency.
Okay, very, very quick question on that. I know you're only representing the Bar Association here, not the president. Do you see a role for the Bar Association to be a watchdog in this regard? We've seen the Bar Association play a very prominent role as a watchdog of people's rights over the last 2 years. Do you see a role in the transparency operation as well?
I think, I mean, I wouldn't say, although I'm
very quick response.
Although I'm representing the Bar Association, they did not tell me what I should be saying. But having said that, I think as lawyers, we do play a significant role in terms of accountability. If you look at most of the cases, during the crisis, after the crisis, before the crisis, a lot of things were challenged. Even Honorable Sumandiran, in his capacity as a lawyer, has challenged a lot of those things. So I think we have got an opportunity to play that role, provided we are retained. Now, for us to get retained, there has to be that public need to hold government's decisions accountable. And that will come with more openness, more information, engagement with the public. So that is the role that we say. It's not only for lawyers, but I think for accountants. I think our laws are very clear that we shall not participate in any deal that has a corruption element in it. Our professional ethics prohibit it. So I think we have a big role to play.
Thank you.
Not limited to the lawyers.
Thank you, Asha. I'm going to speed this segment up because we're just about 10 minutes away from our closure time. Mr. Vish Govindasamy, you've been quiet right through this thing. You head the chamber as chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. This area of state-owned enterprise, how much of a concern is it to your chamber, to you as a businessman as well? And what do you see as the way forward in the SOE privatization and SOE reform?
Thank you, Adam. First of all, I would like to thank the President, the State Minister of Finance, and the Ministry officials for getting this IMF program on the road. As a Ceylon Chamber, way back in 2019, as soon as the COVID hit, we were the first ones to actually go to the Finance Ministry and say that this is the opportune time to go to the IMF. We hadn't defaulted then. We had all the opportunity of getting it right, but unfortunately we were shoo-shooed off. But maybe this is where we are today. And for SOE reform, and I think that's the key, it's SOE reform, and sometimes we use the word privatization and everybody gets excited. There's a lot more to do before privatization. I think the Honorable State Minister talked about the hospital that people are thinking it's for sale. It's not about selling, and I think it's about reform. And I think Minister Kanchana this morning explained to the Ceylon Chamber of the type of reforms that he has done at CPC and he hopes to do at CEB. And we are all very grateful of what he has done at CPC. We have fuel in this country now. So there was no selling of any assets or anything like that. But it's a better way to run these organizations. So there are things where government is not supposed to be doing businesses. Unfortunately, there are lots of resorts and hotels and restaurants and various things which government in some form or another has got in. So those are things that they need to get out of. Now, SOEs also have gotten into the form of subsidizing. We cannot continue to subsidize. I think the years of subsidies are out the window. Right? We have to make sure, and I think the members of the opposition talked about the socio-economy. We need to look after the vulnerables, right? But that doesn't mean giving handouts. How do we, make sure their livelihoods are better? So I think SOE reform is a huge subject, and I'm happy that there's an office that has been created now. There's a DG who's looking at it. And the last week we saw some announcements of some of the big ones that we are losing colossal amounts of money, mainly because of mismanagement. Mainly because of mismanagement, because if you look at our neighbors, they have something called the Navaratnas, the 9 SOEs, right, that brings the biggest amount of revenue to the country. They're called Navaratnas, right? So doesn't mean just because you're SOE that you have to lose money and you have to be mismanaged and you have to be, they don't have to be privatized and belong to private sector management. They can be well run, right? And they have to be, you talked about transparency, right? Lot have to be put on open, books have to be open, boards have to be appointed properly.
Right.
Right?
Doesn't that have a lot to do with the appointment of the people who run these organizations?
I was just about to say, the boards, we cannot have friends and family in the boards of these SOEs. We have to have professionals, people who know the business to run this SOEs. So hopefully, I think we have come to the era of this type of thinking, and hopefully this will get done. And we from the Ceylon Chamber are fully supportive of this kind of reform, and we will not hesitate to call out where if things are not going the right way in the reform sector.
Yes, Mr. Govindasamy, I think the Ceylon Chamber has a huge responsibility to also play a watchdog role especially in the constitution of the boards of management of these SOEs, because ultimately, incompetent people in charge of these organizations, these are large businesses, and they have to be run as such if they are to serve the economy in any way. Mr. Harshapran, you wanted to make one more comment before.
You
might have to speed this up.
Is that, you see, the question that I'm asking is on a different matter. Is our legal system good enough to give us the competitive advantage that we are seeking to get in the current strategy that the government is employing? Simple thing, to attract the dollars. I don't think our laws have gone through a revision that needs to be done. And even in the strategy that appears to be taking place, we see there's a lot of room for coordination. Changes in law in one area has to be complemented by changes in laws to another area. So due to the lack of coordination, today, speaking for as a private legal services provider, an investor finds it extremely confusing. Leave aside anything.
Land ownership law, for instance.
Not only that, investment laws, your exchange control laws, your company registration laws, they change overnight. Uncertainty and lack of predictability drive away investment. So whatever the reforms program the government takes place must have a very clear coordinated strategy with the legal framework, and not only the laws that are in the books, but the gazette regulations, the plethora of laws that never really leave the statute books when they come on it.
Thank you. The Honorable Kanchana Vijayasekara, I wonder whether you have a comment to make about your reform of the CPC and what we can expect in the CEB as well. I mean, these are the two primary drainers of our economy.
I would say we have done a lot of work in terms of the petroleum sector reforms. One thing is to make it more efficient. Cost-reflective pricing formula was one initiative that we had to do, cut off subsidies so that we don't overburden the treasury. So we did the same thing on the power sector, electricity sector as well. The CEB reforms is something, actually Harsha is also part of the committee drafting the legal framework for it. So we are hoping that we'll have the draft act in Parliament maybe by the end of May. The President will announce the roadmap for the energy sector reforms and the policy. What we hope to do is, I think it's very similar to what Iran, Harsha, your SJB blueprint, in your economic blueprint for the energy sector has outlined as well. Competition in generation, competition in distribution, power wheeling, those sort of options to be given. So we're well on our way for the unbundling process to take place. CPC2, what we've introduced with 3 new suppliers into the retail market, is to have a healthy competition. I think attracting players like Sinopec, United Petroleum, Shell with RM Parks, those will be massive investments and give a massive confidence to the other investors as well. I would say the IMF program brought that confidence. IMF program brought not just the confidence and the money, but also that stability to the banking sector. Because even until now, we are unable to do any procurement through letters of credit. So I'm sure with the program coming into effect, we'll have better suppliers, we'll have the financial assistance of letters of credit, more banking facilities. So with that, we will have better suppliers coming into the market. So we hope with those, of course, we are planning on doing a human resource audit on both SOEs to identify excess or whether there's a deficit. So we need to find that as well. And also the renewable energy roadmap. President will lay it out in May. We've done a lot of groundwork on that, on clean energy, green hydrogen, climate change, all those things taken into consideration. And the most important factor would be in this transformation, I would say the cost-reflective pricing for electricity is a challenge that we have done, but it had laid the groundwork or the foundation for more renewable developers to take part. Ability to CEB to pay back is one important thing that we did with the cost-reflective pricing. So with that, we hope that 30% thermal power could be converted immediately to renewable energy, which will drive the generation cost down. Because in terms of electricity pricing, 86% is on the generation cost. So we have to drive that down. For that, we are ready to do that when the President announces his roadmap in May.
Thank you, Mr. Vijayasekara. We are very pleased to hear that. And we hope again that the results of this restructure will be transparently available to us with clear targets for achievement, and that those targets will be monitored and achieved. Many of the questions I'm asking are actually questions that have come in also from the audience. So even though I'm not reading them out as questions, I'm taking the gist of it for the benefit of those of you who feel that your questions may not have been addressed. I'd like to get into one last area very quickly. And, all this we've talked about raising ourselves from the abyss is dependent on the people that we have in this country to take this task forward. Now we have Ali Ashik from /com, an IT sector that has the potential to be the number 2 foreign exchange earner in this country and is already at number 3. And we also have Mr. Ken Vijayakumar from the Sri Lanka Institute of Personnel Management. The impact of the brain drain, how significant is it for you? We've seen this in every company. I don't think there's anyone here in the audience whose organization hasn't faced a massive exodus of staff over the last year. How significant is it for your industries in particular? What steps do you urgently recommend as an immediate measure to try and rectify this problem, because we seem to be losing the best amongst us? Ashik, if you will take the question first and then perhaps Ken.
Yeah, thank you. As you rightly said, we have close to about 145,000 people working in the sector, close to about 83,000 focused on the export side of this. And these are people who earn fairly high income, and with the dollar depreciation, the high inflation, etc., that was coming, that came to fore last year, this industry actually pivoted into those and increased wages quite high. So it was not really the loss of income or an income reduction or anything that is leading to the brain drain. It's, I think, also not about opportunities, because this is an industry where demand outstrips supply. So companies are ready to hire talent wherever they may come from. The main question is about the middle layer, which are people who have young families, where they see where this country is heading to, whether there is hope for their children. So it's a much more bigger picture and confidence, as Mr. Sharada Malino spoke about, at the individual level, whether they would want to remain here and build a future for themselves. I think that will, with all these coming, all the reforms and the IMF support facility coming and the economy improving slowly, that would reverse over a period of time. But as a messaging, as a communication, I think we need to improve a lot from the government side and from the industry side about the positivity, the opportunities here. But it has definitely affected, because when the middle layer leaves, it's very difficult to build new talent into the industry. And much more difficult is where we need to attract more investments from outside as well. This is a sector where the global demand is constantly rising. And if you look at some of the countries in the region like India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, this sector is becoming a significant part of their GDP. Sri Lanka has the potential to do that. I mean, this sector has grown almost 13-14% CAGR throughout the last 20 years. It has the great potential, and it's a very low-hanging fruit because there are no market access barriers, so to speak. There are no tariff or non-tariff barriers. Any Sri Lankan can go and sell this to any part of the world. You don't need free trade agreements or any of this nature, right? We are virtual. So essentially, this is a very low-hanging fruit for us to grow exponentially. We just need to retain the talent, and that will come from a lot of macro factors and a lot of positivity being put out.
Thank you. Ken, your quick observation from you, please.
See, I represent the larger part of people, See, we are members are people managers, the HR managers of the companies. The current problem is, as you said, the professional brain drain, which is about 30 to 40% currently every company is facing. So there are a couple of issues connected with it. One is to retain them. How do we going to retain? The other one is for the existing employees, they're asking for pay hikes because of the disposable income being reduced. Can the companies give those pay rises? It's difficult because then the cost of production will go up, and then they are completely nervous. We are the export industry and your price will go up. So it is actually a real a problem for all the HR managers or people managers in the country, because ultimately it will come as grievance to the HR department. So how do we look at this? And from the government, they need to give, as Mr. Amalian correctly said, give the confidence for them to stay back. How this will be, we can turn this around. How can we look at the the tax structure, we can, sort of revise little by little in the future for them to come and work here, stay back, because many professionals are planning already to migrate to many other countries, and because they come to our HR managers and ask for letters of, confirmation, their work experience letters. So every day now, our focus is more on giving letters and references rather than, looking into the operations. The other thing is, one last observation now, see, now as, we get people from the society. As politicians, now, if you are going for rebuild the country, is a change management. What is the message the politicians should give to the society? One of the electorates, they were like the crackers for the IMF loan. So, but they must educate. No, all of us get together, we must build the country, right behavior, in sustainability, in conserving resources, use renewable energy. This has to start from the top to the bottom. So that's how we can build the country. Otherwise, only this discussion will not work. We must have a proper plan to take this country forward. Thank you.
That's an important point for the Honorable Mr. Ali Sabri to take note of for his team. I'm going to have to wrap this up because I've also been getting signals from our compeers, Savitri, and the organizers. Is there any final comment that anyone would like to make on this before we close up? Anything left unsaid that needs to be addressed? If not, I'd like to thank the panel, His Excellency in his absence, and everyone else here. I'm not going to take you all by name. Thank you for your presence here, your participation in the free and frank discussion. Oh, I'm sorry, we've left out a colleague from SLIM. He was actually talking to me earlier on about national planning. I think a comment on that, national branding rather, I think a comment on that might be useful to close up. You have already made a proposal to the state, or you initiated action last year, if I remember, through SLIM, to look at a national branding campaign. What has come of it? What is the result of that? What's happening on that?
Yeah, actually, we did a comprehensive study about understanding the country's soft power index, where we are going to stand. So when you look at from the last year to this year, so there's a greater fall when it considers Sri Lanka. It was 74th position last year. Now we are at 115th position. So that because of the political, economical, and social issues that we faced during the last year. And my humble request, because Honorable President's two senior advisors are here. So actually, if you look at some of the countries like Bahrain and even Singapore, those countries are having separate unit for nation branding. Nation branding is something actually putting all the BOI and Export Development Board and the Tourism Promotion Bureau together and approach in one line. So you can sometimes convert your tourist. Today tourist can be converted as a tomorrow's investor. So we are actually proposing that kind of approach to Sri Lanka. I think our launch pad, Dr. Harsha and Minister Iran was there. So we are focusing on that. So when times to come, we will bring our proposals to the government and all other relevant parties. Thank you very much.
Since your comment was on branding, and I find that we have panelists that we haven't even questioned. My apologies, Ms. Faisal from the Sunday Times, and you're in charge of the financial unit. But of course, this is to do with an area of media and national branding. Would you have any comment that you'd like to make on that? We also have the head of the Hotels Association here, who have problems of their own. Perhaps we can hear a minute from the two of you before we wind up.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very interesting point that he made in terms of, and there has been a debate going now, I think, in the tourism industry as to whether we should call it Sri Lanka or Ceylon, and whether there should be one branding that covers all sectors. But beyond that comment, I would like to ask a question. I wanted to ask this from the President, but I didn't have the time. Maybe Mr. Ratnayaka can respond. I mean, in this whole process, there is a saying called, there is no gain without pain. Now, what pain would the public the public have to undergo during this process of reforms? I mean, what are the difficulties that people would have to face?
Okay, got it. I think the president spelt it out quite a bit in a few deliveries that he made. One was in Parliament during the interim budget, followed up with the budget, and then again in March, on the 6th of March, I believe, he laid it out. It's going to be very difficult. I think the fuel pricing formula kicking in and us having to pay the real price for fuel, the cost-reflective electricity coming in, the inflation hitting, and the cost of living going up. And on the other side, you have the taxes kicking in and your final take-home packet reducing. You've got, so...
Shrinking.
Shrinking, yes. And these are all pains. And at every level of society, this pain we will have to go through. I must say the worst in terms of uncertainty is over, but the worst is still not over. We still have a few more months of this, but already we are seeing a trend of the rupee strengthening. This will vary. I mean, once the import restrictions are lifted gradually, this will have some fluctuation and it'll steady off at a certain point, and the policy, once it kicks in, also will make it independent. But that, together with inflation coming down, has seen some of the prices coming down. Then you also get the benefits of the cost-reflective tariffs, the fuel pricing formulas when the currency strengthened. We saw the minister already making an announcement about the fuel prices yesterday. We had to bring it in 3 days early because the shed owners were not replenishing stocks, not the city ones. The city ones, the turnover is very high, but it's when you go outstation, they take a load, it sits there and goes down gradually over 5, 6, 7 days. So they didn't want to take the hit. And these are issues that we will face. But also there are checkpoints for that. I'm digressing from your point. But there are checkpoints. There are laws which say a shed owner has to maintain a minimum reserve. So I think the minister is writing to them and reminding them of that, that they could lose their license for not complying. But so it's started turning, but it's still going to be a difficult time. But there's light at the end of the tunnel. We've started seeing the light. Like everybody, I think I've heard it a few times over, comms has been very bad. We also need to make note of your point that there has to be some branding of the country and overall branding. Right now, we depend on tourism to do it for us, but that's a tourism branding, not a country branding. It's not for business, it's for leisure. So we depend on the BOI to do another on the investment side. But we need to work that out, and I'm sorry I don't have the answer or the solution right now, but we'll make note and start working on it.
Thank you. And we shall excuse Mr. Ratnayake because he's indicated to me that he's half an hour behind his next appointment anyway. So state business calls, please. Just one question, one comment. Thank you. One comment from the Hotels Association representative, Mr. Hettigoda, I believe is your name. Thank you. We are sorry we didn't accommodate you up here, but please.
Thank you, Adam. At least tourism gets a few minutes, even though tourism will be the largest foreign exchange earner by 2030. Our prediction is that we will reach about $10 billion. And I think I must mention the importance of that. Considering the economic situation the world is going through, tourism is certainly, according to the president also, is a low-hanging fruit. However, I think we have serious problems in positioning Sri Lanka as a high-end tourism destination. We don't really have proper standards. We don't require tourism stakeholders to register, to maintain quality levels. And also, His Excellency mentioned about green economy, sustainability. We have a great opportunity to make all the hotels sustainable, renewable, based on renewable energies. I think some laws we want to discuss with the Minister Kanchana. And also mentioned about no global campaign. Sri Lanka has not had a global marketing campaign for 10 years. And how do you expect to get there? I mean, these are things that we need to fix quickly. Lastly, I must say that for 4 years, tourism has suffered from Easter Sunday to COVID to economic crisis. There are many SMEs who are struggling. The President mentioned that. And I hope the Secretary of the Treasury and the Central Bank will seriously look at least giving some breathing space for these SMEs, because their debt has accumulated to levels that even if you operate at 80–90%, you will not be able to pay. And as you know, historically our highest occupancy rates are between 60 to 70. So these are some of the concerns, and I think the government must look at tourism in a serious manner if we strongly believe that tourism is going to be the #1 industry in this country.
I think there is something to add to that in the form of the very recent trend and a very scary trend of a tourism mafia forming here within the framework of Sri Lanka in certain regions, with the low-end travelers forming themselves together on long stays and setting up business which is counterproductive to the industry and counterproductive to the country as a whole. I think those are matters that the state also needs to take awareness of. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for your presence here and the audience for your participation.
Thank you so much to our ministers, our members of parliament, representatives from the chambers and professional bodies, as well as our moderator for doing yeoman service. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we bid you a good day and do hope you take back some fruitful and thoughtful discussions to your places of work or chambers or, well, hopefully parliament too. Thank you very much.